Chapter 977. What are they doing? Behind the bushes at the edge of the square, on a bench, Anya curiously approached the fog mirror in her hand, spying on the two people not far away. In order to avoid attracting attention, she used the refraction of the glass mirror of another office building to capture the light and shadow on the other side. However, there was too much dust on the glass, making the image too blurry. It was always fluctuating, making it impossible to see their lips clearly. The wind was also fluctuating, making it impossible to hear their voices. Wow, the vice principal student is crying. Anya elbowed her companion next to her, full of surprise. Is this the legendary school bullying? Are we going to stand up for justice? On the chair next to her, Yuan was still holding a zither bough in her hand. She sighed helplessly. Anya, did you drag me here just to see this? Is there anything else? Anya looked back, puzzled. Don't you also look like you want to see it? I'm not particularly. Yuan was silent for a long time before she suddenly remembered that it was uncomfortable to have a human-shaped lie detector sitting next to her. Particularly what? Anya curiously came over and looked carefully. Your expression that day was so scary. After knowing that teacher has a child, that's not teacher's child. Yuan subconsciously raised her voice. Yes. Teacher is clean and keeps her chastity. Is that okay? Anya rested her chin on her hand as her smile turned into one of schadenfreude. But why do you think that a man with that face of his wouldn't be fooling around everywhere? Crack! It was the sound of the string of reason snapping. Anya! Yuan took a deep breath and tried to maintain her calm. 3 more hours of practice this afternoon. Anya pretended to be surprised, but looking at her face, she didn't know why she couldn't joke anymore. However, when they turned around again, the misty mirror was already empty. Is he gone? Yuan sighed. Anya didn't speak. The fog mirror in her hand suddenly shattered. Like a frightened beast, she arched her back, the veins on the back of her hand bulging. And suddenly, a head popped out between the two. What are you looking at? The young girl leaned against the back of the bench and curiously looked at their stiff expressions. By the way, have you been following me since just now? No. Anya forced a smile and shrank back a little. She had always been fearless, but now she actually felt a little uneasy. We're just passing by. We'll leave now. Looks like he's really following me. The little girl nodded, as if she had understood. You want to protect me? How cute. Anya's expression stiffened as she nodded vigorously. Then, the girl behind the gown suddenly reached out and touched their hair, as if she was praising a child. She was filled with gratification. Good girl, have some candy. She placed 2 candies in their hands. Just like that, before they could react, he turned around and left. In the long silence, Yuan and Anya looked at each other in dismay. Yuan was about to say something when she saw Anya twist open the candy wrapper and throw it into her mouth to chew. It seemed to taste good. Soon, she looked at the candy in Yuan's hand. Yuan sighed and put the candy in her pocket. Then she reached out and grabbed Anya's collar. Without waiting for her to object, she lifted her up. Enough of your nonsense. Anya, she said, it's time to go back to class. But before she left, she couldn't help but look back in the direction that the little girl had left. She was vigilant and confused. Even if she had secretly investigated for a long time, she still couldn't find the secret of this mysterious woman. It was as if she had something on her teacher and relied on her teacher's tolerance to do whatever she wanted. But her motive was elusive. But no matter what, she couldn't sit back and do nothing. In the silent journey, Yuan bit her lips slightly, full of unwillingness. her teacher's unwilling expression, and sad look of being done whatever she wanted appeared in her mind. She must protect her teacher. But before that, she must find out the relationship between her and her teacher. Well, Yuan was also waiting for a good opportunity today. How rare. I saw teacher Why sure in the office in the afternoon. After writing the last comment, the old Professor Anton looked up at the young man writing at the desk opposite him. Didn't you leave long ago at this time? Are you still preparing for class? Yes. Huaisher looked up and rubbed the bridge of his nose, feeling a little troubled. He put down his pen and slumped into the chair. Anton shook his head and took a sip of coffee. Aren't you going home yet? Mr. Anton, please don't make fun of me, okay? Huaisher sighed. No matter how much you experience, in this world, there are always some things that are difficult to face. You have to face them eventually. Huaisher. Anton patted his shoulder sympathetically and picked up the coat on the hanger. Remember to turn off the lights when you leave later. Okay. Huaisher slumped on the table, motionless. The old professor took one last look at Huaisher, not knowing if it was sympathy or schadenfreude. He shook his head and left. In the silence, only Huaisher looked out of the window in boredom, looking at the flying dust under his gaze. It was as if he was looking at his own ashes. Spring had not arrived yet because the winter was too long, and some people were still alive, but they were already dead. For example, he himself, the future star of celestial genealogy, had drowned in the condemnation of the public before he could rise. He could not wait until tomorrow, thanks to someone calling him Dad. Huaisher's dream of becoming a father was fulfilled. At the same time, it brought about the death of society. Before Tongyi even raised her mouth, he had already burst into tears. Before Tongji could finish her sentence, he could already feel a chill on the back of his neck. Sometimes if a student taught too well, it might not be good for the teacher, especially when you were teaching how to chop heads. Originally, Huaisher could still explain. Originally, he could have explained. As long as he closed the door, patiently persuaded, and thoroughly proved, then he still had a chance to save his reputation. However, just as he turned his head and was about to speak, he heard the living room door suddenly open. A group of jubilant teachers carrying all kinds of gifts swarmed in under the leadership of Ms. Andrea. It turned out that everyone heard from the vice principal that you were back, so they specially prepared a welcome party for you. Were you surprised? Were you surprised? This was the climax of the tragedy. They did not listen to Huaisher's explanation at all. After looking at the faces of the two, which were somewhat similar, everyone already knew in their hearts. In less than 5 minutes, the news spread to every corner of the present realm, and hell, as if it was on the Rainbow Bridge. There were already people in the military bureau who began to curse. No wonder honest people like us couldn't win against the heavenly state genealogy. Those dogs in the heavenly state genealogy actually had wives. Then, half an hour later, Huaisher had already received a gift from London, the Encyclopedia of Parenting Experience, 100 Tips to Teach You to Be a Good Father, Metatron Publishing's 100th Anniversary Collector's Edition, the kind that even came with a collector's certificate. But for some reason, when Huaisher opened the book, his hands couldn't stop trembling, and his bitter tears couldn't stop. At this point, the only reason why he hadn't been divided into 5 levels was because he was still too young, so young that there was no chance for him to commit a crime. An 18-year-old man having a 12-year-old daughter. This was ridiculous. Although everyone loved to hear about this kind of gossip, this kind of unreliable news could only be circulated for a few days by marketing accounts that were trying to ride on the hype. Then it was automatically thrown into the trash with unreliable rumors such as the women behind the Prince of Paradise, scum Huaisher holds senior officer hostage and escapes, bastard Huaisher dresses as a woman in Ingzhou to hook up with rich people Celestial genealogy cowherd seduces the ruler in hell, and so on. Of course, everyone was still very happy to occasionally use it to persecute innocent teenagers. How happy it was to see people in trouble, especially when Weisher was in trouble. It was simply endless fun. Admittedly, everyone was an ascender who had broken away from vulgar interests and devoted themselves to protecting the world. But while working to save the world and rebuild the utopia, it didn't stop everyone from having some fun. All of them were pretending to be confused, which made Weisher even more indignant. Yet he couldn't raise his hand and chop off the head of that black-hearted woman on the spot, or cut off his own head to prove his innocence, so he could only make things worse. I hate it. Weisher lowered his head and looked at a certain name that had been written all over the originally empty lesson plan. Every bit of red ink seemed to be tears of sorrow flowing from the heart. He couldn't help but look up at the sky and sigh. Why am I so bitter? He only hated himself for being too slow to react. He didn't kneel down, kowtow, and call for his mother. At least then, everyone could die together, perish together. He was just one step too late and missed the opportunity. Just thinking about how he would have to face that face when he returned home made him inexplicably flustered, and Tanguy began to have PTSD. The shadow in his heart was too great. It made him hesitate for half an hour on the table. Finally, he clenched his fists and encouraged himself to the void in front of him. I'm no longer a 3-year-old child. I'm an adult. I can do it. I can do it. Then he took a deep breath and got up. He jumped up in fright when he saw the figure waiting behind him. Behind him, the little girl who was eating ice cream tilted her head and looked at him curiously. Big brother, what are you doing when you're not home yet? Don't come over. Weisher was so scared that he almost jumped onto the table and subconsciously leaned back. Also, don't call me Big Brother. Can I call you a stinky little brother? Tanguy gnawed on her ice cream stick and jumped up to sit on Weisher's chair. She even spun around twice. Holding her chin, she sighed helplessly. Is this what you call a nerdy person who loves to talk about things? You say that you love her, and you talk about how you want benefits all day long. In the end, when she finally became a big sister, you hide in the office and don't show your face. When she comes to your company to look for you, you look around nervously and tell her not to come here because it will affect your work. Tanguy wiped the corners of her red eyes. Unknowingly, her tone became as if she was accusing a scumbag. She was about to cry. Who do you think she is? Chapter 978. Do I think you are? Of course I'm the one who wants my life. Weisher glared at the black-hearted woman in front of him. Things have already gotten to this point. Don't you feel sorry at all? Tanguy froze for a moment before awkwardly looking away. Sorry, not only am I not sorry, but I also feel good. Also, I didn't say anything wrong. She seemed to be wronged. Logically speaking, my current body is formed from the young master of life's divinity, your incarnation, and your origin substance fragments, and soul. Apart from the fact that my bloodline is not human, everything else comes from you. In Journey to the West, the Buddha called the peacock Buddha Mother. So aren't you a priest? In the long silence, Tanguy gradually became confused. Isn't my joke funny? I've thought about it for a long time. Why didn't you react at all? Weisher was speechless. He turned his head away and felt that tears were about to fall. Not only are you not ashamed, you're even using me as a lame joke. He couldn't live like this anymore. He had enough. He wanted to go back to his mother's home. For some reason, a feeling of inferiority arose in his heart. He couldn't let this continue. He had to be serious. He had to have a good talk with this black-hearted woman who didn't know what was good for her. After shrinking, Her style was almost different from before. If this continued, wouldn't the sky be turned upside down? He had to let this bad thing, who hadn't even paid rent, understand who the real master of the house was. Children who didn't listen were mostly spoiled. A beating would be enough. Huaisher closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She straightened her face and looked serious. He looked up and saw a fist stop in front of him. Her slender fingers opened, revealing the chocolate inside. "Do you want some candy?" Tangi blinked and looked at him. Without waiting for him to answer, she opened her palm and stuffed the chocolate into his mouth. "Okay, this is the benefit." Tangi smiled and asked, "How does it taste?" Huaisher subconsciously chewed and was stunned when he heard this. He couldn't help but turn his head and sneer. It's just average." All right. I just wanted to give you a surprise." Tangi stepped on the chair and stood up. She skillfully raised her arm and placed it on Huaisher's shoulder. She sighed helplessly. "I didn't expect you to bring an outside woman home. It's just a misunderstanding. Calm down. How about Big Sister take you to see my office?" She leaned closer and said generously, "There's so much space. I can use it alone. The office is quite big. You can even move your game console there. If you're tired, you can sleep directly. It's okay." Huaisher rolled his eyes but didn't say anything. He saw Tangi raise her hand. Her slender wrist poked out from the collar of her shirt, and she snapped her fingers. "Let's go." "Pa." With a crisp sound, Huaisher's vision blurred and his feet suddenly swayed. It was as if he had suddenly fallen tens of centimeters. Only then did he realize that he was actually standing in front of a huge, gloomy park. Then his body sank, and a strange thing appeared on his shoulder. "Let's go, Huaisher beast." Tangi pulled his hair. Just like in the past, she excitedly pointed to the front. She didn't care that her body shape and weight were completely different from the past. Huaisher was angry and shook hard. "Get down." "I don't want to." Tangi grabbed his hair firmly. "I don't want to." "Hurry up. Let's go." It was as if it had landed on the ground and didn't move at all. She let Huaisher shake and twitch crazily like a madman. She sat firmly on his shoulder and didn't move. "Great, so you called me here because you lack a mount." Huaisher was helpless. After noticing the puzzled gazes of the people around him, he could only sigh and step into the darkness. In broad daylight, the bright sunlight couldn't penetrate the layer of darkness that shrouded the park. The thin fog was faintly surging, sealing off the countless hellish precipitates and isolating the park that was closest to the essence of hell in the school. When Huaisher stepped forward, his figure was quietly swallowed up by the surging fog and darkness. Soon, he blended into the countless flickering figures and disappeared. Only at the gate, two withered old trees once again fell a piece of incomplete yellow leaf. It was as if he was above it, and as if he was below it. In this way, Tai's miracle was completed. This was one of the true essences of alchemy. The last time he came to Tai Academy, it was when Huaisher borrowed the place and the secret ritual to cast resentment. As an important institution of the Ivory Tower, where alchemists gathered, it also shouldered the role of adjusting the depth and balance of the campus and even various secret experiments. And no matter which one it was determined that it would continuously produce a large amount of hellish precipitates, even the byproduct of miracles, disasters. A little carelessness would form all kinds of strange phenomena or nightmares, or simply attach to the experimental mice and become a mess of monsters. It was like a fish tank used to raise fish for too long. No matter how it was cleaned, the hellish aura could not be washed clean. And after the last Golden Dawn attack, the internal load of Tai Academy was almost about to explode. In order to clean up the hellish residue in the school, it was simply piled up here, causing it to be impossible to neutralize in a short period of time, triggering the hellish transformation of the area. Except for a few people in charge, not a single shadow could be seen. Well, there were still a lot of shadows that could be seen. Of course, Huaishur was among them. According to the usual practice, the solution was actually very simple. As long as they waited until the middle of the semester, they would dump all the blame on the students and be done with it. At that time, they could also hold a wave of dungeon clearing competitions or something. It was like selling college students who were about to graduate to work in a black-hearted factory, and then using this to improve their performance. With Russell's black-hearted nature, he would probably not give them anything more than a few rewards. On the contrary, the students who were dizzy with exams, competitions, and trials would start to rush to 007. However, now it seemed that the entire campus was not in a quiet state of being sealed. On the contrary, it seemed to be boiling. Countless dark shadows were constantly wriggling in the mist, and the hellish aura and hellish precipitates that were drifting away began to condense rapidly. It was artificially stimulated. Huaishur could not help but frown, and his expression became gloomy. Such a drastic change must be done by someone in the depths of Tai Academy. Could it be that someone saw the new dean of Tai Academy and planned to trip him up? A series of conjectures kept emerging in his mind. He subconsciously rubbed his fingers twice, feeling a burst of itchiness. No matter who wanted to play tricks, he did not intend to let the other party get away with it. Suddenly, a ferocious roar came from the mist. The pitch-black shadow suddenly swelled, rose, and turned into a wriggling outline. Amidst the violent shaking of the earth, it rushed towards them, madly running, a painful roar. Huaishur raised his hand indifferently, but before the shadow could reach him, he found that the rushing monster stiffened in midair, and then it was forcibly pulled back into the mist by a stretched-out hand. Then there was a scalp-numbing tearing sound and a wailing sound, and then there was only the sound of sticky blood surging and vague and hoarse muttering. Trash, trash, a bunch of eyesores. In the end, no sound could be heard. Only the low sound of footsteps could be heard. A blood-stained outline slowly appeared in front of Huaishur. The plastic coat was stained with scarlet, and one hand was holding a pitch-black shovel, while the other hand was holding a round ball. The face was hidden under the mask, leaving only a pair of bloodshot eyes, looking back at them. Then he froze in place. "Ah, Mr. Huaishur and Miss Why you on?" The old man stammered, as if he was pleasantly surprised, and waved his hands excitedly. "Welcome! Welcome! Why didn't the two of you come? It would have been better for us to be well prepared." Huaishur frowned and looked at him for a long time before recognizing him as the manager of the alchemy instrument who had helped him forge resentment in the past. "Mr. Ping? Yes, it's me." Ping Du put down his mask, and a warm smile appeared on his wrinkled old face. "What can I do for you?" Huaishur looked around and was puzzled. "What are you doing?" "Of course, I'm doing a big cleaning." Ping Du raised his hands. "Mr. Isaac informed me that a great master, Ms. Hua Yuan, has come to manage Tai E Courtyard. We all want to have a proper welcoming ceremony. Then we plan to clean up." As he spoke, he picked up the spherical spray bottle in his hand and sprayed it to the side twice. Then 2 tragic screams could be heard. After mixing in detergent, fragrance enhancer, and a lot of other things, the highly concentrated holy water successfully dissipated several broken aberrated spirits on the spot. "Are you guys so hardcore when it comes to cleaning? Why do you make it look like a horror movie?" "Ms. Hua Yuan is here." "Ms. Hua Yuan, please sit." "Great master, please wait a moment. I'll go make tea." Great master, please come this way. Following the usual words, ferocious figures appeared from the thin mist one after another. When the executioners who were covered in blood saw the newcomers, they showed a sincere and surprised expression in unison. They lined up and clapped their hands to welcome them. They were just short of playing trumpets and singing and dancing. The corners of Huaishir's eyes began to twitch, and he turned to look at Tangi, who was on his shoulder. Great master? Yes. Tangi cupped her chin with her palm and looked down. Why? It's just a great master. Am I not worthy? It's just that because those old guys from the Stoneware Society have monopolized it for so many years, they can't announce it to the public yet. Everyone can just keep it a secret. Although the title of Great Grandmaster was shocking, it was at least much easier to accept than the title of True God, which could make people tremble just by breathing. Besides, in my current state, no one would believe that I'm a god. Tangi casually moved her fingers and looked around, not hiding her disdain. Russell, that fellow, gave me a garbage dump. No wonder he's so generous. As she spoke, she looked down at Pingdu, who was rubbing his hands and looking up at her piously. Then, you're my subordinate? Pingdu nodded frantically. Tangi did not hide her coldness. Forget it, you're too old. Why don't you retire? I'll double your pension. How about that? This. Pingdu was stunned for a moment, then quickly understood. He threw away the shovel and the spray can in his hand, rummaged in his pocket for a long time, and took out a tube of potion and swallowed it. Suddenly, a white mist rose from his old body. In an instant, his stooped body quickly straightened, the wrinkles on his face expanded and contracted, and he quickly recovered his youth. The turbidity in his eyes disappeared, replaced by a cold light and coldness, like a poisonous snake. But now, the poisonous snake bowed its head devoutly and listened to orders. It wished it could wag its tail like a dog. Tangi moved back a little and shook her head in disdain. What a pity, you're too ugly. Pingdu did not waver. I can do plastic surgery. Tangi was unmoved. Forget it. No matter how good-looking you are, can you compare to my Huaishir? It's okay. Pingdu was still fanatical. I can also change my sex. In an instant, the eyes of the strange and old alchemists lit up, and they raised their hands. The group of old cooks began to enthusiastically sign up, afraid that they would be a step late. We can all change our sex. Chapter 9, 79. Huaishir sucked in a mouthful of cold air and clutched his swollen forehead, feeling that something was wrong. Hey, you guys, you are all alchemists. Don't you have any modesty? What modesty is, I don't know. Is that thing useful? It's just a sex change. It's nothing. Yes, as long as I can go further. Even if I become a beast, I don't care. That's true. The eyes of the veteran alchemists, who had been pickled in hell for who knows how many years, were shining, and they could not wait to get down on the ground and kowtow immediately, for fear that Tangi would not want them. Hey, what drug did you give them? Huaishir turned around and asked. Nothing. Tangi calmly waved her hand. Isn't there an assessment process? I just made a few things, and that's it. Originally, I just wanted to get a teacher's title and be a colleague of my silly boy, but this group of guys cried and shouted for me to be the dean. Why bother? Isn't it good to be alive, my friend? Huaishir looked at the group of alchemists who were scrambling to jump into the fire pit, and was full of pity. Isn't there another great grandmaster? Pingdu's expression became awkward. In fact, we have invited Mr. Mikhail many times before, but he was not interested in this place. Not interested was already quite a euphemism. Moreover, unlike Garland, who was a traditional great grandmaster, Mikhail was good at ultra-wide area alchemy and composition, and even Hell's development and research. They couldn't learn it even if they wanted to, and these things, none of them could be called safe. In contrast, the things in the Greater One Academy now were simply harmless to humans and animals. After all, it was a dangerous project that could blow up the ivory tower if it was not handled properly. As long as Russell was not crazy enough to sleep on a bomb, he would never have arranged for Mikhail to come here. This led to the Greater One Academy being like a child without a mother for a long time. Although it was an important institution, it was a younger brother compared to other places. The budget was getting tighter year by year, and the tasks were getting heavier year by year. There was no end to the bitter days. Now that they finally had a chance to turn things around, not to mention a sex change, even if they were to become hybrids and wag their tails, they would not hesitate at all. Moreover, after witnessing Lin Li's amazing alchemy skills, who wouldn't be stupid enough to not know that they had a golden thigh to rely on this time? He wouldn't leave. She would not leave even if she was beaten to death. She would stay even if she became a ghost. How troublesome! Forget it. As long as you don't get in my way, you can do whatever you want. Tong Ji shook her head indifferently and pointed at Ping Shidu on the ground. You, change back. It's too disgusting to look at you like this. No problem. Ping Du nodded furiously, but the effects of the youth potion had yet to wear off, so it couldn't be removed. After thinking for a moment, he reached out and wiped his face. His originally gloomy and cold appearance was instantly smoothed out. It looked empty. It was hard to tell which one was more terrifying. Please come in. Please come in. The old men were ecstatic as they led the way in front. Your office has been tidied up for you. It's right in front, but Tongi shook her head uninterestedly. She looked around. Forget it. The smell is too strong. Hey, you, bring a chair over. The little girl on Huaishi's shoulder gave the order arrogantly, and the group of old men began to carry it out accurately without any complaints. Within a few minutes, a row of chairs was placed in front of Tongi, because they couldn't figure out what kind of chair the boss wanted, and didn't dare to make the decision without permission. They simply brought one of all the chairs in Tai Courtyard. There were plastic chairs, reclining chairs, armchairs, computer chairs, and even an electric chair mixed in. It was unknown when these were relics left behind from the border. They were covered with blood and mold, and were entangled with an unknown amount of hatred and pain. Waves of resentment rose to the sky, and it was so dazzling that people couldn't open their eyes. Why do you need so many? Take them away. Tongi waved her hand in disgust, pointed to an office chair that looked clean, and patted Huaishi's head. Huaishi could only roll his eyes and carry the boss over. But after Tongi came down, she didn't sit down. Instead, she seemed to be waiting for something. She patted the chair and looked back at Huaishi. It was as if she was looking at a leather cushion in the wrong position, waiting for it to return to its rightful position. Hey, don't go too far. The corner of Huaishi's eyes twitched again, and twitched again. Then he looked away and pretended not to see. Absolutely not cooperative. Then his vision blurred, and he appeared on the chair out of thin air. Then a light body jumped onto his knee and happily adjusted to a comfortable position. Her elbow rested on Huaishi's arm, as if she was very satisfied with the quality of the armrest. Huaishi rolled his eyes and sighed helplessly. Can't you act like a leader? Am I not very dignified? Tongi asked, puzzled. If you don't believe me, ask around. Who doesn't think I look like a leader? Isn't it dignified? Dignified. Too dignified. It's simply more dignified than the heavens. The old men lining up on both sides began to sing praises. Each of them looked like they were possessed by lizard men. Their small mouths were smeared with honey. Just the leader's leather cushion alone could be praised with 8 million words. This was really F*** enough. Why sure knew that he couldn't count on these old fellows who had already become alchemists. He shook his head and sighed. So what's next? I don't know. Tangi blinked and asked curiously, as the leader, shouldn't I say something first? Welcome, welcome. Ping Shidu took the lead, and the 2 rows of old cooks began to applaud enthusiastically. But this group of old men is too boring. There's really nothing to say. Forget it. Tangi shook her head regretfully and immediately thought of something interesting. Her eyes lit up. Anyway, it's a rare opportunity. Why don't we make a secret summoning ritual and catch some ruler to kill and celebrate? That's enough. Huaishe was so scared that his face turned green. My students are still here. What if 1 or 2 of them are missing? There seems to be something wrong. Tangi seemed to have discovered something. Her smile became full of interest. So, your first reaction is not that you can't do it, but that you want to transfer your students first? Huaishe rolled her eyes so hard that they almost reached the sky. Can we talk about serious business? Wasn't that serious business just now? But since you think it's too exaggerated, then forget it. Tangi smiled and rested her chin on her hand. She glanced at the old cooks on both sides. As the new dean of Tai Academy, I have to prove my ability. Moreover, the house is too small for me to live in. She paused for a moment and suddenly said, Huaishe, hold my shoulder. Huaishe was stunned. He thought she was playing a trick on him, but from her teasing tone, he smelled a hint of seriousness. He sighed. He raised his hand, passing through her long black hair that was as cold as water, and pressed on her shoulder through her shirt. It was cold to the touch. Like this? He asked. A little harder. Tangi said, hold on tight. After all, this young body doesn't have enough strength. Of course, it's best to hold on, but you'll be embarrassed, right? She looked back at Huaishe. Huaishe looked down at her. He clenched his fist and exerted force. It was as if he was crushing her shoulder, but she seemed to feel no pain and smiled softly. She just smiled. In this way, a blazing red light emerged from between her fingers, like an octagonal sharp slender awl. The moment the sharp crystal appeared, it caused the whole Tai Academy to shake and tremble. The secret instrument that shrouded the outer layer wailed and was on the verge of cracking. Everything turned into bubbles. Only this thing was real. God. Pingdu's eyes widened. God's wedge. But under those 2 pairs of dull and indifferent eyes, his expression suddenly stagnated, and he closed his mouth. Then, a terrifying wind pressure rose out of thin air, because the god's wedge at her fingertips was slightly twisted at an angle, as if the whole world was also turned upside down. It was violently twisted by an invisible force, setting off a mournful tornado. In an instant, it spread out. The tyrannical pressure fell from the sky, pressing all the alchemists who dared to raise their heads to the ground, coldly ordering them to kneel, crawl, and kowtow to God's power. Then, a faint light illuminated Tangi's open and closed lips. She said, First of all, let's have some light. In her hand, the pen called God's Wedge fell towards the dark Tai Academy, stirring up the lake called reality and setting off a terrifying vortex. At this moment, Huaishe unexpectedly smelled such a familiar aura from the God's Wedge. Unbelievable. It seemed to be the first time in his life that he cast the sacred mark. Under the guidance of Tangi, it was smelted with silver and lead and shaped into an outline. It was a writing object that matched the Book of Destiny. It was a branching matter. Now, the moment the order from the Supreme Being fell, the darkness that filled the entire Greater One Academy suddenly surged. Countless cracks emerged from the earth and the void one after another, forming a series of loud roars. Then the darkness of nothingness began to boil, surge and shrink. It was pulled by an invisible vortex, converging towards that point. Under Huaisher's feet, the ordinary-looking office chair had already issued a sad cry, unable to bear the burden. It was full of cracks, but with the will of Huaisher, it quickly healed. What was more terrifying than this was the power that burst out from his arms. It was as if he had reached out and pressed down on an erupting volcano. Terrifying heat emerged from the slender body, trying to break free from his hands and break free from the shackles. His hands and even his arms were burning with sizzling sounds. She was not joking. If Huaisher had not held her down, the remaining power that leaked out would certainly have crushed everything around, and even this young body would have been overturned. And now, in the storm, Tanguy's long black hair had gradually lost its color. It was as thin as a dream, drifting, growing rapidly, and being ignited. There were wisps of red flames emerging. Look carefully. Huaisher. This is what you'll be using very soon. At that moment, he heard Tanguy's whisper in his arms about the construction of the heavenly palace. The roar of the heavens breaking erupted. The sealing mystic instrument that enveloped the entire Imperial Academy shattered. But in the midst of the ear-piercing alarm, there was no abyssal sediment gushing out. The terrifying calamity that was enough to lower the entire hell by several levels had now been completely contained. In the small vortex in front of them, a palm-sized black ring was formed. The crystal of disaster that had already condensed into a material state was flowing rapidly like liquid along the small ring, demonstrating this terrifying power with a speed comparable to that of a ray of light. It was the entire hell that was suppressed within a foot's reach. Then, when a wisp of fire emerged from the middle of the ring, it was born out of thin air, glowing with a dreamlike brilliance, constantly changing, as if it encompassed everything in the world. As the god's wedge was raised, it slowly rose with the black ring and hung in midair. What is that? Huaisher stared intently, ignoring the stinging pain in his eyes. It's just some consumables, not worth mentioning. Tanguy pressed his wrist, her slender fingers covering the back of his hand, and told him, next is the main point. Chapter 980. At that moment, the flames in the dark ring silently spread out, unfolding in thousands of threads, entangling in the turbulent liquid disaster. And then, from the outside to the inside, everything was penetrated. Thus, hell was ignited. Under the will of the god's wedge, the disaster endlessly transformed, rubbing against each other, and radiating waves that were enough to make the Tai Academy tremble, condensing the disaster into charcoal, turning the depth into a furnace. Now, the flame was ready, the color of gold and iron spread under Tanguy's fingers, and under her control, the casting furnace was activated out of thin air, driving Huaisher's soul into it. When Tanguy raised her finger, Huaisher also raised his finger. When Tanguy opened her eyes, Huaisher also opened his eyes. In this resonance based on fate, Tanguy's will dominated his will, pushing his soul to quickly spread out. And then he stretched out his hand. He grasped the burning ring of hell in front of him. The iron fingers closed, and hell shattered with a sound. What flowed out from it was dancing and surging flames. Monstrous waves swept out, but under the control of the casting furnace, it turned into a breeze. All the heat was tightly held between the 5 fingers. It formed a high temperature that seemed to melt the soul. Bitter pain and unprecedented clarity acted on his consciousness at the same time, as if it was ignited and lifted to a high altitude. When looking down, all the details were clearly visible. None of the changes could escape his senses and eyes. Everything in the mortal world was like dust. A soft whisper sounded by his ear. Slender fingers guided his palm, and he clenched the blazing power tightly, telling him, "First, you have to lay a foundation. At that moment, the 5 tightly clenched fingers opened slightly, grabbing at the ground under his feet. The earth rumbled, and a terrifying shock spread out, enveloping the entire ivory tower, causing the border to be shaken. Then, a high-pitched cry came from the darkness. It was the metal framework buried deep in the earth, roaring and roaring, as if it had come alive. The heavy soil hidden in the deepest part of the ground was rapidly rising, tearing apart the roots of the plants, destroying the decaying framework, filling up the holes, and repairing the rock stratum. In the end, it forcefully propped up the countless buildings buried underground and brought them to the surface of the earth from the darkness that never saw the light of day. In the astonished eyes of all the onlookers, they only saw countless dust and soil flying up. The haze that covered the sky was blown away by the storm, and the Greater One Academy that was hidden underground unexpectedly rose up out of thin air. And at the highest point, on that ordinary-looking chair, there was a figure who seemed to be embracing the scorching sun, holding endless flames in his hands. It was so familiar. Then, adjust the 4 seasons and erect the axis. Huaishi's heart was filled with boundless comprehension as he muttered those words. He slowly flipped his palm and curled his fingers. The sound of the earth cracking could be heard incessantly. Massive amounts of calamity energy surged out of the casting furnace. After undergoing a divine qualitative change, they turned into rays of light and fell to the ground. Then, metal pillars broke through the earth from the darkness, like giant trees, rapidly growing into the sky amidst the sharp sounds of steel rubbing against each other. A total of 81 pillars surrounded the Greater One Academy, forming a prison and re-establishing the boundaries. They soared straight up and connected with the sky. Passing through the will of the Creator, they actually connected themselves to the framework, once again occupying the original position and authority of the Greater One Academy. Thus, the foundation of the sky was established. A mighty sound echoed from the Greater One Academy, shrouding every inch of the land. It combined all the power in one place, revealing the shadow and embryonic form of the towering city watchtower. It was a completely different method from everything Huaishi was used to. It was a domain that he had not been able to touch even with his constant research and exploration. It was different from the ultimate that connected and contained everything in it, and then formed a whole. Instead, it was a method of control that relied on all the power and meaning around him, turning everything into his appendages. All things revolved around him. This was the method that truly belonged to Yun Zhongjuan. And its foundation was the heavenly palace, which was completely different from the ultimate. One was the blue sky, and the other was the yellow spring. It corresponded to the foundation of all things and the peak of all things. Did it rise from the ground or fall from the sky? Under the guidance of Tangi, his soul was immersed in this change, and his perception followed the resonance, spreading and flowing into the Greater One Academy that was undergoing drastic changes at this moment. He experienced a completely different feeling from the past. With the growth and spread of countless iron and stone, the gloomy Greater One Academy was rebuilt under the sun, and then a huge alchemy equipment was connected to it. More than 100 furnaces, 71 laboratories, 2 large workshops, and even countless intricate pipelines and connections inside were broken and reorganized. After replacing the old network, a new cycle was formed. When everything that had been scattered gathered together once again, what it understood was a vast and mighty sound that caused this soul to tremble. All things surrendered at his feet, offered their power, and held it in his hands. Thus, the 10,000 feet tall watchtower rose from the ground, and the brilliant heavenly palace was displayed here. This was the authority that belonged to Yun Zhongjuan. After a long, long time, when Huaishi finally opened his eyes, he still couldn't believe what he had just felt. But in front of him, The Greater One Academy was no longer what it used to be. Instead, it had turned into a building hundreds of meters high. The whole body was cast from metal, and under the illumination of the setting sun, it reflected the iron light and was as smooth as a mirror. There were no windows or doors. It was like a giant pillar that grew from the deepest part of the earth. Standing proudly on the border, it showed its unparalleled sense of existence. This was the alchemy mechanism that was reconstructed in the style of the Heavenly Palace, the new Greater One Academy, at the top of the tall building. Tangi stood on the edge of the tall building and looked down quietly. The strong wind blew her hair up like floating bubbles. To be honest, your aesthetic sense is really strange. This straight up and down appearance without any sense of design is very compatible with your straight appearance. She sighed and said, although the materials are ordinary and the design is equivalent to having no design, it can still be used for the time being. At least, it's much more convenient than the basement. How is it, Huaishur? How do you feel? Huaishur sat on the chair, dazed for a long time, and then went limp after a long time. He finally had the strength to rub his face, only to feel a wave of sleepiness and emptiness. He felt that his body had been hollowed out. He couldn't even stand up. He finally knew why Tangi asked him to sit on the chair. This feeling, I can't describe it. He rubbed his face, trying hard to sort out those thoughts and experiences, but he found that the more he wanted to describe it with words, the thinner and more ethereal the experience became. There was no way to describe it. Everything just now was just a rehearsal for the construction of the Heavenly Palace. Just like how the ultimate ruin was to Great Si-Ming, the Heavenly Palace was also Yun Zhongjuan's core focus. Every ascendant's ultimate and Heavenly Palace were completely different. For example, Huaishur's ultimate focused on its sturdiness and large capacity. In addition to providing shelter for a large group of people, it could also be used as a safe and cage to restrain some dangerous objects. There were also specialized ultimate ruins that could be scattered into a number of small burial grounds for a large group of people to use. The same principle applied to the Heavenly Palace. Ying Fangzhou's Heavenly Palace focused on unparalleled destructive power. It was built with the help of his only large group of kunpengs. The internal structure was divided into yin and yang through a special transformation of origin substances, and countless electrodes were created in the clouds through a secret mechanism. In the end, the result was a vast expanse of lightning. At this moment, the Heavenly Imperial Palace that Tongji had set up was just a casual creation based on the structure of the Greater One Academy. It formed a large alchemy workshop that integrated all the instruments within. Huaishur's ideal structure was based on the Twilight Village and the Eternal Frost Furnace's structure, maximizing the effects of the sealing hand and forging furnace. However, he still didn't know how to construct it. It's not difficult for those who don't, but it's not difficult for those who do. You just have to remember this feeling. Tangi said calmly, in any case, this is just for you to practice. When you truly construct the Heavenly Palace, you'll have experience and won't be flustered. You also need to speed up your progress. Huaishur, it's already been a year and you haven't advanced much. Don't disappoint Big Sister's expectations. Huaishur spat out a mouthful of blood. What do you mean by a year? And I haven't advanced. Is a young master's fate not considered a great master's fate in your eyes? If these words were to spread, who knew how many ascendants would cry in the toilet? Compared to other ascendants, Huaishur, who had reached the peak of the 3rd tier and the 4th tier in 2 years, was already advancing at a rocket speed. However, calculating the time, it was about time for him to advance. After delaying for so long, the 2 major items, the National Slayer Crown and Heaven's Inquisition's Divine Mark, were already prepared. If he didn't advance, he could only look at them every day. After killing Lu Baiyan, The heavenly fate that had been passed down to him had all returned to him. Now, Huaishi's accumulation could be said to be unprecedented. For others, the gap between the third and fourth tiers had already been easily crossed when young Master's fate became Great Master's fate, not to mention the qualitative change of divinity from Balder. The most difficult item, the reflection crystal, was also completely solved. Now, all that was left was a material that contained the divinity of the ocean, as well as a suitable venue and secret ritual. However, he wasn't in a hurry at all. After being the organization's tool for so long, it was time for the organization to give back to him. There was no reason that the company didn't even provide him with food when he was already 007, right? He directly threw this matter to Russell to solve. The current problem wasn't that he couldn't find any treasures with the divinity of the ocean, but that there were too many things for Huaishi to choose from. He didn't care about the ordinary ones at all. They were all ordinary goods. It's just that it's rare for me to rest for a while. He slumped in the chair, feeling a little listless. It can't be helped. This world needs you more and more. Tangi smiled. Good luck. She raised her hands and rubbed Huaishi's face and hair hard until it looked like a chicken coop. Only then did she let go of him in satisfaction and nodded. No matter what, my family's contractor must be the best. That pleasant and expectant smile, under the soft light of the setting sun, was filled with a magnificent color that took one's breath away. Huaishi was stunned for a moment. Then he couldn't help but laugh and shake his head. Does praise count as a benefit now? Then I'll give you a hug of love, okay? No, paying for love. There's no love at all. Where's the refund interface? Please tell me. There's no refund, only top up. Now, there's a benefit when you reach 1 billion. Just like that, during the conversation, they slowly embarked on the journey home. Chapter 9, 81. That's great, that's great. In the principal's office, Russell looked at the tower that rose abruptly outside the window, full of gratification. Don't make any calculations. Rebuild the campus. I hope everyone can learn from teacher Huaishi. Isaac, remember to praise him in tomorrow's regular meeting. Principal, please treat your students better. Isaac replied expressionlessly. Also, Ms. Huaiyuan's renovation plan has not been submitted to the school affairs office meeting. There are insufficient procedures, and it is an illegal building. Also, the biggest problem at the moment, how do we disclose Ms. Huaiyuan's identity to the outside world? Just say that she's Huaishi's relative. Russell held his coffee cup and replied calmly, who doesn't have a distant relative, right? The relative of a grandmaster killer is also a grandmaster. Is that reasonable? You think a grandmaster is a grandmaster just because you say so? Ha! Shifu only counts when he learns to say so. Russell turned around indifferently. We're not a listed company. It's just a change of position. Do we need to hold a press conference? Don't worry. She's always done things carefully. Nothing will leak out. Besides, isn't there still Huaishi? Just say that he did it all. Wouldn't that be the end of it? You can even gain another wave of reputation. He could only watch helplessly as Luo Su pushed his student into the pit. Isaac was speechless. After the idle chatter, Russell returned to his seat. It was rare for him to be so serious and not turn into some random animal. So, you came back in a hurry right after the Continuation Academy meeting. Did you gain anything? I can't say that I gained anything, but I do have some bad news. Isaac knocked on the desk, and a thick stack of documents suddenly appeared in front of Russell. It was the Climate and Environment Analysis Report of the present realm. In recent years, there were records of temperature changes in various parts of the present realm, including data on snowfall and rainfall. The appendix alone was more than 400 pages. In addition to the adjustment records of the great mystic Zarathustra, there was also authoritative data collected and verified by the Bronze Eye. Russell picked up the document and read it carefully. He skimmed through 10 lines at a single glance. His speed was very fast, and he adeptly picked out the key data. After looking through it again, he did not find any problems. But when he checked again, with a suspicious attitude, he finally realized that something was wrong. He paused on the snowfall data of the Americas for a long time. Then he dug out the rainfall and snowfall data of Doomsday, Rome, and India and compared them repeatedly. It was only when he examined the table with a critical eye that he noticed a trace of abnormal fluctuation between the table and the chart. It might be easier to understand if we just look at these few documents. Isaac picked out a few items and pushed them in front of him. Under the guidance of a professional scholar, Russell finally noticed the source of the abnormality. Not only was there a slight difference between the planned and actual rainfall and snowfall, but there were also strange deviations from the normal fluctuations of the line diagram. Also, there was a slight disconnect between the climates of different regions. To be honest, this should be within the range of reasonable error, right? After thinking for a long time, Russell found it difficult to understand. No matter how you look at it, this is normal climate change. Although he was also known for his erudition and scholarship, according to the division of Doomsday, Russell belonged to the liberal arts, and he had not studied the field of scholars. It was a little difficult to look at these things. Principal, haven't you noticed that the weather has begun to warm up? Isaac suddenly asked, startling Russell. He looked back at the nursery outside the window. Some of the plants had already sprouted new shoots. Compared to the previous years, it is indeed a little earlier. Russell nodded and asked in confusion, but this shouldn't be considered abnormal, right? It's just a representation. Isaac shook his head, picked out a few records from among them, and placed them side by side in front of Russell. These are the data records that have been analyzed. I can't see anything even if you show them to me. Russell shook his head with a headache. Can you just tell me the conclusion? To put it simply, all these seemingly normal errors will cause small effects that will eventually lead to an explosive stage. After the temperature of the present realm has continued to rise for so many years, we may face unexpected changes. At first, no one cared about these small deviations that were within the reasonable range. An early heavy rainfall, an unexpected earthquake, a delay or change in the circulation of the ocean currents, or a storm. The world was too big. Even the Astronomical Association and the 5 Permanent could not take care of everything. Moreover, everything was within the reasonable range. The trial at the beginning of the year, the inspection in the middle of the year, and the comprehensive calculation at the end of the year, the 3 major inspections a year, the 6 routine tests, and even the daily monitoring. After these deviations and data structures were uniformly reviewed, they were all considered normal deviations without exception. But as so many years passed, the impact of these small deviations had become greater and greater. It was not until all the inducements were gathered together that the Continuation Academy discovered the problem they had to face. Under various chain reactions, the climate of the present realm would usher in large-scale abnormalities. According to the results calculated by the London mainframe and the 16 branches throughout the realm, the present realm would usher in unexpected large-scale floods and droughts for a period of time in the future. The scope of the coverage was simply jaw-dropping. 30% of the entire region may be affected, and most of this 30% area was covered in densely populated areas. In other words, from the results, Hell's infiltration into the present realm began as early as 5 years ago. Russell flipped through the complicated data and records and compared them one by one. When the results were reversed, he could feel the meticulousness and perfection of this plan. It was simply impeccable. It can actually exert a subtle and cumulative influence on the present realm through the three major blockades. Russell suddenly understood. Such an exquisite method should be the work of the Pied Piper, right? Such a slow and methodical preparation, long years of waiting, and little by little paved the way for disaster. Then, at the critical moment when the War of the Worlds was about to begin, the Astronomical Association's weakest point was struck. This kind of patience was really chilling. Russell could already imagine how angry the Directorate of Command would be after the results came out. It could be said that the pot had exploded. This was not a problem that could not be solved. In fact, it was completely within the scope of being solved. However, it could not be delayed, and they had to face it. There was no other way to avoid it. 3 feet of ice was not formed in a day. When 10 feet of solid ice appeared under their feet, how could it be solved in a hurry? In contrast, the Astronomical Association would rather find out that the rancher had quietly dug a big hole under London, intending to take a stroll. At most, everyone would just fight head-on. How could it be so torturous? Now, if they wanted to solve this problem, they could only transfer enough manpower, material resources, and time to deal with it. And even if it was solved, they would have to face the remaining problems. The tedious work of post-disaster reconstruction and dealing with related disasters. This was where the real headache came from. Floods and droughts in a wide area would leave a psychological shadow in many people's hearts due to floods and droughts, which would then leave a shadow in the Silver Ocean. And this pollution of the collective subconscious would give birth to prototypes that did not know the negative side, interfering with people unconsciously. In the end, the flow of origin substances would cause all kinds of disasters to enter an active period, accelerating the birth. Just like the locusts flying thousands of miles after a drought, the plague after a blizzard, no one knew how many monsters like the 5 gods would be born. If they did not deal with it well, there would be another chain reaction. And in this process, the possibility of the flute player not causing trouble was infinitely close to zero. At the same time, it would take a lot of effort to peel off these negative prototypes from the Silver Sea. The cycle of the present realm was too precise. Every adjustment was a huge project that affected the whole body. If they hoped to solve it through such a crude act as modifying the data, it would be the 3 major seals themselves that would be damaged, and the foundation of the present realm would be overdrawn. The gains did not make up for the losses. And don't forget, there was still the most important war of the realms. Could they still send someone to discuss with those rulers who were sharpening their knives, saying, "Sorry, my kitchen is leaking and the floor heating is broken. Let's not have a father-son game tonight." After tonight, who knew how many institutions would have cerebral hemorrhages and how many overtime dogs would curse their mothers? This wave was directly aimed at the war potential of the present realm. There was no way to avoid it. According to the preliminary analysis results, the Survival Institute has made a response plan. According to the speed of the Creator's regulation, the impact should be reduced by about 70% before the disaster breaks out, making the disaster within a controllable range. Isaac said, "In the following period of time, all hydrologists and meteorologists will be forcibly conscripted. After that, when disasters break out, at least 6 more coroners of meteorological types will be needed to participate in the regulation." Oh, Russell pinched his chin, his eyes moving slightly. "In that case, we can look forward to the activity of our Cloud Lord in the future." "Let's wait for Cloud Lord." Isaac shook his head. He did not have high hopes for this. How far could a rank 4 Cloud Lord interfere with such a large-scale meteorological anomaly? At most, it would be 100,000 square kilometers. It was almost half the size of the Dongsha province. It sounded sensational, but compared to the actual situation, it was simply a drop in the bucket. This was not something that could be reversed by the power of a single person. After a short moment of thought, Russell nodded. I already understand the general situation, he said. Said he. Now it seems necessary that I should go to London again. Huh. Isaac was puzzled. Russell rubbed the beard on his chin and said meaningfully, after such a thing happened, the landlord must be short of long-term workers. I plan to find some work for us. Isaac immediately understood. This guy was definitely going to do something again. Chapter 982. Russell wanting to cause trouble was secondary. Isaac was worried about another problem. After so many years of getting along, how could he not know that when Russell said, we, he definitely meant you? It was absolutely impossible to include him in the list. When the time came, there would definitely be a lot of troublesome things to deal with. Then Russell watched as everyone was so busy that they were vomiting blood and sat at the side drinking coffee. Suddenly, the vice principal had the thought of resigning for the first time. But it was undeniable that Russell did have the ability to influence the decision-making of the directorate. He could also accurately pick out the meat he wanted from the directorate's plate. When necessary, he could even spit the bones back into the plate. Of course, he couldn't be so unlucky now. After all, he had a big family business. If he wanted the whole family to eat and live well, he could only work hard. Moreover, now that celestial genealogy had just been rebuilt, what he needed the most was to expand his influence and show the world his ability to take on more responsibilities. He wasn't afraid of dirty work, but he was afraid that when everyone was working, he wouldn't be able to get in. In a bad way, the flute players' conspiracy also created convenience and opportunities for them to use their abilities. Otherwise, it would be more troublesome to make a difference. This was a rare opportunity, so he did it immediately, without even changing his clothes. Russell directly took out the suitcase from the cabinet and was ready to leave. Get ready, Isaac, Russell finally said. I'm afraid there's a lot of trouble in London now. I may be gone for a long time, and I may not be back before the War of Worlds breaks out. If there's an emergency and I can't react in time, I'll have to rely on you guys. Isaac was stunned. What about the school? Aren't you doing well? You don't have to worry about the Abyss campus. Next week, Sharma will go to Ramanujan to support, and Ms. Chen will also have Yangzi's help. Moreover, I thought about it when choosing the location and specifically chose the most desolate and marginal place. Those two places are not within the scope of the War of Worlds, so no one will care if the door is locked. What about celestial genealogy? Isaac asked. Internal affairs are not decided by Isaac. External affairs are not decided by Marcus. Russell answered without thinking. If you need strategies and guidelines, call for a meeting with the Academic Affairs Office. If you need a decision, go to the Tai Academy. If you need a tool, go to Huaishur. If we still can't solve it, I'm afraid it won't make a difference whether I'm here or not. When the time comes, everyone can just eat, drink, and have a barbecue. What's the use of barbecue? Isaac frowned. Since there's no point in doing anything, I might as well seize the time and enjoy myself. Russell waved his hand, casually picked up his suitcase, and was about to leave. After taking 2 steps, he came back and gave a serious order. Also, while Sharma and Yangzi are still here, hurry up and ask them to repair the big guy in our warehouse. It might come in handy later, but their jobs are already full. Isaac flipped through the schedule in his mind and shook his head. It's too late. Look at what you're saying. If it's too late, then work overtime. Russell said in surprise. We don't have rules for weekends and 8-hour workdays here. This is the startup period. Isn't it normal to work overtime until you have cirrhosis of the liver and stay up until you have a cerebral hemorrhage? Besides, you don't need to raise your salary. It's for the sake of our ideals. It's not shameful. Finally, he turned around and gestured to Isaac with a fist clenched and cheered him on. The old bastard disappeared without a trace. Gone. Gone. In the silence, only Isaac lowered his head and calculated the workload that his 8 Time-Axis clones wouldn't be able to handle in the future. Finally, he realized what had happened. A strand of hair fell from her head, which was gradually thinning out. Is this utopia? I'm in love. In the eastern waters of Ingzhou, the world seemed to be locked in a black box, undulating and spinning amidst the rumbling. Amidst the violent overturning, rising and falling, there was an endless amount of heavy seawater churning on the edge of the ship and surging to the deck. The pale searchlight couldn't illuminate the heavy curtain of rain. Only a sudden flash of light in the clouds could show the ferocious appearance between the sea and the sky. Under the dark, iron-like clouds, thunder rumbled. Countless turbulent waves rose and collapsed like mountains. Every slight change triggered a series of loud noises. Mixed in the thunder, it was difficult to distinguish. The sweeping storm surrounded the surroundings without any pattern. It was like invisible giants pulling ropes, violently wrestling, but no one knew where to pull the ship that was as fragile as a withered leaf. If it was a fragile sail ship, it would have been torn apart by this tyrannical wave long ago, right? However, even the alloy cast with modern technology could not resist such ferocious power. After the usually tranquil ocean revealed its ferocious state, the power of the entire world seemed to be shrinking along with the waves, indiscriminately crushing anything that dared to intrude into this sea. In the narrow corridor, the middle-aged man held the handrail and staggered forward. He was almost thrown up by the force of the tide. The safety rope was constantly tightened, and faint sparks were produced from the friction between the lock and the handrail. Finally, he pushed open the door in front of him with difficulty. "Miss Anna, we've arrived." However, there was nothing in the cabin behind the door. Only a few teaching materials were rolling on the floor with the surging tide. The man at the foot of the mountain was stunned for a moment. He subconsciously looked up and felt a wave of dizziness. At this moment, in the violently shaking cabin, the only person who didn't change was a figure. As if gravity was defying, she sat cross-legged on the ceiling with her head lowered and focused on playing the game in her hand. Among her long blonde hair, a strand of naughty bangs broke free from the restraint and fell down. The girl's blue eyes looked up and looked at the man at the door, who was stunned. It was not an illusion or something. In a moment of daze, the man at the foot of the mountain seemed to see a faint glow from within. So fast, we were so close to finishing the fight. She looked down regretfully and looked at the game that could not be paused. She could only seize the time to play the game. Then, the cat-type creature quickly sent her back to the base with a handcart. "Ah, it's really a dumb game. Why don't you give me the trial version equipment and put in such a troublesome monster?" Ania was furious. She turned off the screen and stuffed the handheld device into her trouser pocket. She stepped on the ceiling and got up, easily crossing the railing and passing over the top of the mountain. "Please inform me. I'll be back soon." Boom! There was a loud noise, and the entire ship was suddenly thrown up. The sound of steel wailing could be heard, as if it had hit a reef. When the man at the foot of the mountain turned around, the girl had already stepped on the ceiling and disappeared at the end of the corridor. Her footsteps were light, only he was stunned for a long time. He looked down at the raincoat in his hand and realized that he did not give anything away. Hey, Miss Anna." At least, she had already run far away. The man at the foot of the mountain shook his head helplessly. He simply put on the raincoat and chased after her in a sorry state. In order to stay in the underworld, he was forced to be a babysitter by the boss. Or did he really have the talent to take care of children? Amidst the violent shaking, he opened the door of the cabin. Then, The storm came like a torrent, almost pushing him back into the cabin again. On the deck, the crew members with ropes were running with difficulty. Amidst the loud noise, everyone was roaring with all their might. A huge amount of seawater was drawn into the sky and fell violently, endlessly washing the deck. Even if it was only a slight aftershock, it was enough to roll up an unprepared person and blow him away. In the loud sound of the alarm, the searchlight illuminated the huge waves in the distance. The tide was like a building rampaging in the hurricane, suddenly pressing down on the insignificant ship in front of them. The hull was swallowed in an instant. It rose from the turbulent waves with difficulty. Abnormal cracks had already appeared on the deck. No, it's about to flip over. The captain's frightened shout came from the earpiece. Mr. Yamashita, we can't go any further. Stop talking nonsense. Did I ask you to go out to sea for charity? Yamashita clung to the railing and climbed up from the deck like a drowned rat. He roared into the earpiece, "Are the waves or the coast police more terrifying? Bring out the courage you had when you were smuggling. If you delay things because of you, no one else needs to do it. I'll personally help you." "No need, Mr. Yamashita." In the communication, the girl's lazy voice sounded, "It's fine here, it's not far. Next, everyone can move back a little. After all, if the ship really flips, I'm afraid I can only swim back to Donbua." At this moment, on the violently shaking waves and the deck, the slender girl calmly walked among the remaining waves and jumped onto the twisted railing. In the clouds in the distance, lightning flashed and thunder roared, illuminating the dark sea sky again, and the waves in front of her. So, she stepped on the railing casually and stretched her body. She began to warm up until every inch of muscles that were stiff in the game relaxed again. Finally, she waved behind her. "Miss Anna." Yamashita grabbed the railing and shouted to her, "Please take care. Don't worry, I'll be back soon." The girl grinned and fell back. In an instant, she disappeared into the darkness. When Yamashita leaned on the railing and looked down, he saw the figure stepping on the turbulent waves as if walking on flat ground. The turbulent waves couldn't swallow her. She strolled leisurely. From beginning to end, she stood at the top of the waves. Wherever she passed, only pieces of floating ice were left that quickly broke and collapsed in the waves. In the vibrating low sound, the light of the searchlights lit up in the rainstorm, passing through the thick curtain of rain and sprinkling on the surface of the sea, making the gloomy surface of the sea shine like low-quality jade. However, under that thin layer of light, a pitch-black shadow was rapidly emerging and expanding. At that moment, the wandering white wolf grinned, revealing sharp canine teeth. It seemed to be smiling. "Found you." Chapter 9, 83. The boiling ocean seemed to freeze for a moment. The violent undercurrents disappeared. It was as if peace had been restored. However, this wasn't the arrival of peace. Instead, something even more terrifying was rising from the depths of the ocean. It rapidly climbed, heading towards the light above the ocean's surface. As a result, a rapidly expanding shadow was outlined on the surface of the ocean. In this brief moment of peace, everyone felt an indescribable pressure and fear. A streak of mournful lightning fell from the clouds. Immediately afterwards, in the mighty thunder, the disturbed surface of the ocean shattered. Millions of tons of seawater were stirred up, bursting forth with a huge wave sweeping through everything. Meanwhile, a thick and solid wrist had already reached out from the ocean's surface, sweeping towards the young girl who didn't hide the fluctuations of origin form at all. Waves surged again. The ocean wind whistled. The turbulent waves swept through under the wrist's slap, almost lifting up the retreating ship again. The mountain lying on the guardrail couldn't help but rise into the air and fall. Her eyes widened in a daze. She saw a slender silhouette that seemed to be soaring in the torrential rain. Under the dazzling light of the searchlight, she lightly jumped between every drop of water. Countless fine ice cubes condensed under her feet, and then quickly shattered under her trampling. The used steps, which she wasn't yet proficient in, displayed a completely different application method from the little cabin in the forest and Huaishur. Under the support of the Maiden of Frost's holy mark, she turned the torrential rain into a foothold. The sense of balance and flexibility cultivated from the long training in the Inquisition was enough for her to shrink to an inconceivable degree in an instant. It was also enough for her to jump as nimbly as a cat from any place she could stand on. Even gravity couldn't restrain her footsteps. At this moment, she rose into the air and landed. She stepped on that sinister wrist, freezing the flowing acid. She looked down. This is the owner of the ocean workshop. The monks of Ingzhou don't look good. They're also a bit big. Could it be that they grew up eating nuclear waste water? In the boiling ocean, a huge octopus that was like a building slowly emerged. On its head covered in scales and traces of distortion, two huge eyes shone with a terrifying light that wasn't inferior to the searchlight. Immediately afterwards, thousands of countless limbs emerged from the depths of the ocean. Hey! Ania nimbly turned around in midair, her hands clasped together as she pulled out a huge ice hammer similar to Huaishur's from the torrential rain and smashed it down on her wrists. Her body soared into the air again under the reaction force, nimbly dodging the entanglement of the complicated tentacles. She lifted her finger and blew a high-pitched whistle at the distant ship. Fire! 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 Yamashita turned around and roared. Back in the captain's cabin, the scholar had already pressed a button. Following a series of flips, harpoon cannons rose from below and fired a barrage of heavy arrows. Heavy steel cables extended out as the arrows flew. The alchemy harpoon, covered in layers of arrays, instantly sank into the body of the giant octopus. Immediately after, a dazzling electric current surged through the steel cable. Amidst the blinding light, the solidified origin substance surged. It clearly did not have any mouthparts, but the huge sea monster let out a roar that caused everyone's vision to turn black. Immediately after, dozens of steel cables broke. In an instant, the high-pressure water current swept across and left a terrible dent on the hull of the ship from a long distance away. The alarm sounded, and amidst the screams of horror, the seawater flowed backward, broke through the quarantine cabin, and poured into the bottom cabin. High-pressure water knife. In midair, Ania was slightly stunned and complained, "I was just joking. Why did Big Sister give me such a troublesome job? I hate seafood." Amidst the unhappy cries, the white wolf once again brought along a frosty wind, breaking through the torrential rain and descending from the sky. It hit the sea monster right in the head. The disaster born from the deteriorating environment screamed, its eyes spewing out a dazzling light. The smell of decay and poison spread with the light, but it was refracted in front of the ice mirror. Behind the shattered ice mirror, black flames emerged out of thin air. The flames of malice surged and shrouded the thin girl, turning her into the incarnation of the evil god in the human world. The gift from the black god shot out from her hands. Two extremely long frost swords quickly shrouded the flames in their eyes. The swords that were dozens of meters long opened and closed in the torrential rain. Wherever they passed, the curtain of rain in the sky was cut into pieces. In the blink of an eye, wounds were left on the huge sea monster's body. But those thick limbs and ferocious body were too huge. At this moment, it was as if they were just scratches and did not care. But soon, multiplying frost grew out of the wounds and began to spread. The freezing was just a facade. The real essence was the resentment that was enough to distort thermodynamics and extinguish the furnace. Now the resentment was growing. Sea House Master roared. Finally, the lower half of his body was revealed in the surging tide. It was a deformed torso formed by flesh and blood stuck together with steel, and the huge sunken liner as the skeleton. Countless phantoms of drowned people emerged from the wreckage of the liner. They danced and entangled around Anna, causing her to pause for a moment. Then, the high-pressure water knife instantly swept across. The terrifying force that was enough to cut through the steel ship tore the ocean apart, stirring up whistling ripples. "Get lost!" Aeneas shouted. The black flames tore apart those ghosts and instantly froze them into layers of frost. After the water knife swept past, they pathetically returned to their original form. The frozen ice shell had already broken apart. Even the arms in front of her chest and overlapping to protect her face were damaged. More importantly, her satchel had been completely shattered. The handheld that was originally placed in the waterproof bag had fallen out and into the sea. She could not catch it. Ah! The handheld I borrowed from teacher. And my save. I almost broke his record. The girl widened her eyes in grief and indignation. The white wolf roared. You're dead. Do you know that? No one in this world can save you. And so, she angrily shouted the messy mafia curse language that she had learned from the small house in the forest. Black flames and white light emerged from her hands again. The love of white deity and black deity was displayed here. The frost sword extended and burst out in thunder from her hands. She slashed down. Amidst the rumbling, the huge wrist was cut in half by the slender blade. Corrosive blood spurted out, and large amounts of ink dyed the seawater into a boiling poisonous soup. The furious white wolf had already stepped on its broken limbs and counterattacked. The two swords in her hands continuously slashed down, dismembering the sinister sea monster inch by inch. Even the barnacle-covered wreckage of the liner was cut in half by the blade. She brandished this power that was too great for her, without any scruples. She did not care about the origin form that was rapidly being consumed. Anna soared into the air. She looked down at the pair of huge orange eyes that were almost within reach. Destroy! Hurry up! The black flames and white light merged in an instant, turning into an undulating beam of intense light that gushed out. The good and evil extracted from countless human natures erupted after the three origin forms had undergone a qualitative change. What was formed was a stream of frost that pierced through the head of the ocean district master. It violently stirred and pulverized all tissues. Countless amounts of frost rapidly spreading and parasitizing the remains of the corpse. Very quickly, the disaster that was born from fear and legend was completely shattered. Anna was panting on top of the messy iceberg, wiping away the rainwater on her face. She lowered her head and gazed at the countless debris floating in the waves. There was also the broken handheld computer. Her eyes began to redden. Wow, this is too much. She patted the screen that would never light up again and muttered sorrowfully, "Save, my save." Only now did Sia, who was lying on top of the railing, finally let out a sigh of relief. He was exhausted. Even though it wasn't his turn to fight, he felt even more tired than if he had been the one to fight. A group of old men were standing behind him, letting a little girl fight. Was this really appropriate? Even though he knew that someone like him wouldn't be of any use, he still couldn't feel at ease. He should have been happy to see the sea monster being dealt with so cleanly, but for some reason, he still felt uneasy. According to the theories of the scholars in the university, as long as the newly born disaster like the ocean district master was eradicated, the sea should return to its original state. But why was this sea still so turbulent? Unless, in that instant, his expression changed. "Miss Anna, be careful. There's also... Anya looked up in confusion. What else? What answered her was a terrifying roar from the depths of the sea. A 10,000-foot-tall tidal wave appeared out of thin air, followed by the whining of countless ghosts and whining whale songs. The ferocious shadow, shrouded in ghostly flames, smashed the iceberg into pieces. There was another one. The disaster brewing in this sea was not just the Ocean District Master, but two. And now, a huge monster covered in pale white bones had emerged from the depths of the sea. It opened its mouth and pounced towards the girl on the iceberg. It was a mutated overlord of the sea, a disaster that once left countless shadows in Ingzhou. A whale. Again, Anna scratched her wet hair numbly. She was like a student who found that she hadn't finished a single page of her summer homework on the day before school started. She began to give up. F***CK, the homework. I'm not writing anymore. Teacher, please help me. She closed her eyes, raised her head, and shouted towards the sky. I don't want to work hard anymore. So, in that instant, there was a faint sigh. It was full of helplessness. And in the midst of the black clouds and lightning, the flying steel bird looked down at all of this, its scarlet eyes reflecting the gigantic whale. Then, thunder exploded. The world was silent. The monstrous sound of the tide disappeared without a trace. Only a blazing light emerged from the end of the sky, tearing apart the dark clouds. Brilliant flames ignited, tearing apart the iron-like dark clouds, breaking through the violent winds and torrential rain along the way. In an instant, it crossed a long distance, galloping from Danbo. It broke through all the haze. In the flames, it descended between the sea and the sky, sinking into the whale's head. Then, what burst out was a sorrowful cry that resounded in the monstrous waves. In an instant, the whale's body turned into ashes. The dark clouds shattered, and the huge waves disappeared without a trace. Only the quiet moonlight shone through the broken clouds, illuminating the stunned girl. On the iceberg, the majestic and gorgeous cross spear dissipated like a phantom. Iron Crow went far away. Danbo, in the continuous rain, Huaishirt closed the window. As if he had just let the wind out, he returned to his chair and calmly looked at the visitors from Looming Hall in the conference room. Where were we just now? He said, let's continue. Chapter 984. In fact, there was nothing to continue. It was just Bullsh**T. But even if it was Bullsh**T, it was necessary in many cases. Both sides were well aware of the outcome and had already expected it. However, they would still go through procedures, or rather conventions, to do meaningless things. Just like an exhibition match, the result was not important, but the participation was important. The Looming Hall needed to express its goodwill to the Dombwa campus through this behavior. Of course, the Dombwa campus also needed to express its respect for the Looming Hall, although it wasn't the first time that they had tried to sabotage each other in private. It could be said that the two sides hated each other. From the beginning, Huaishirt didn't look at these useless snacks that were about to be rolled into a 1,000-layer pancake in the Gong family and Wu family's inner scroll. But everyone still had to put up a front, just put on an act. Instead of spending time on such boring things, it was better to take a look at the students' practice scene. It was just that he didn't expect that the girl of the Russian Federation's fighting nation, the direct descendant of Black God, Anna, after hanging out in the forest hut for a while, began to embarrass herself at the speed of light. She didn't learn the good things and learn the bad things. Not only did she break the handheld phone she got from the teacher for free, but she also learned to shake people if she couldn't win. He held his chin and his mind wandered. He began to reflect. Did he spoil his students too much? Indeed, they were already so old. Not to mention the elements of destruction and the remnants of the world, he hadn't even seen a decent ruler. Per capita, there were no more than 100 heads. Would it be more appropriate to set a KPI? And what was shown was the mysterious smile on the corner of King Donbua's mouth, as if he was listening attentively to the other party's opinions and views. From time to time, he nodded slightly as if to express agreement. But he didn't express any opinions. He just looked at everything in front of him with an unfathomable expression, which made the looming hall's messenger feel more and more pressure. He couldn't help but take out a sweat towel to wipe his forehead. After making a final statement, he looked at the man across the table with expectation. There was a long silence. There was no answer. King Donbua was still smiling, as if he was still waiting for something, but his gaze became sharper and sharper, as if it penetrated the body of the visitor and fell on a distant place. It was not until Yuan kicked Huaishi's chair that he reacted. He raised his eyes slightly and coughed twice. "I've fully understood your intentions and intentions. We respect the idea of Looming Hall and look forward to establishing a friendly partnership with them. Together, they would work to maintain the peace and tranquility of the present realm and Yingzhou. We are also very grateful for your proposal to jointly participate in the border defense of Yingzhou. However, as a branch of the Ivory Tower, the Donbua campus is just an educational platform. It does not have the authority to use force in the present. We respect the sovereignty of Yingzhou. We have no intention of interfering with your country's sovereignty in the past, present, and future." Blah, blah, blah. After 15 minutes of nonsense, Huaishi recited the draft that he had prepared in his mind using his LV-10 copywriting skills, vividly expressing the profound meaning of the words. "It's none of my business. To put it simply, what happened in Yingzhou has nothing to do with me." He had no interest in the border defense of Yingzhou at all. Instead, he despised it. Moreover, don't think about looking for honest people to take the blame for your trivial matters all day long. Annoying, really annoying. As for sovereignty, was there such a thing in Yingzhou? How many days has it been since the word American vassal state was removed from his face? The mark hasn't disappeared yet. How come there are so many people wandering around? He knew what Looming Hall was planning, even if he used his heel. To think, he led Donbua to wrestle with the Eastern Xia genealogy and play against Anfang State's smelly sister, Hupa. This game of driving the tiger to swallow the wolf was very smooth. But Huaishi really had no interest at all. Even if Looming Hall promised more benefits, it was useless. In the final analysis, the two sides saw things from different perspectives from the beginning. Looming Hall wanted to use the method to deal with him. On the other hand, perhaps this was also a test for Donbua, tempting with power and treating Huaishi as an ambitious person. They wanted to see Donbua's attitude from it. But Donbua campus had no interest in taking the initiative to expand from beginning to end. He hadn't even finished eating the food in his bowl. Why was he staring at the pot? If it developed normally, Donbua couldn't finish the benefits brought by this wave of industrial integration and upgrading in 10 years. As for 10 years later, Donbua would be a giant in the metallurgy industry. At that time, with a sneeze, the industrial system of Yingzhou would shake 3 times. Why was he so impatient to be used by Looming Hall now? Even if he really wanted to participate, he must find the Eastern Xia genealogy. Looming Hall, you'd better wait a little bit. Therefore, he couldn't flatly refuse, nor could he show that he was very interested in it. He had to be like fishing for a rich guy, showing an ambiguous and hazy feeling. As long as he used the rules of the Astronomy Association as a tiger skin and pretended to be very tempted but not allowed, he could fight for more rights and interests as a neutral party. These were the notes and detailed cases from Marcus, the ace diplomat of celestial genealogy. Russell sent people to organize and send over the required reading list. Even if he didn't know the details of micro-operations, this kind of thing could be left to others to do. As long as Huaishur could grasp the general strategy, he wouldn't be at a disadvantage. Now, he was using what he had learned. It seemed that the effect was not bad. At the very least, the fluctuations of the messenger's origin substance were quite interesting. The image hovered between "this might be really serious" and "you're F***king kidding me." This cycle repeated until he left. In that case, I will definitely write a detailed report when I return. The messenger of Looming Hall respectfully said goodbye. I believe that there will be progress in the meeting between the two sides soon. After the door closed, Huaishur's smile slowly dissipated and became solemn. To be honest, he was almost shocked for a moment just now. General, the emperor intended to use this battle of worlds to choose the supreme leader of the Wu family in Yingzhou, the position of the great lord of Yingzhou. In fact, there were clear hints in his words. He was only short of directly saying that if Danbo Master was willing to deepen his relationship with Yingzhou, the position of general would not be a problem. It was fortunate that the emperor could take it out should it be said that he was ambitious or arrogant. Could it be that after sending away that American, he immediately felt lonely and wanted someone to accompany him by his bed? Huaishur only wanted to laugh when he heard this. Now that the emperor had the absolute initiative in Yingzhou, after starting the adjustment of the convergence of gods and Buddhas, he was the complete master of the genealogy. The title of general was meaningless. It was just a name that sounded a little cool. It was no different from the relatives of the Han Dynasty in Dongxia, the teacher of defense against black magic in a magic school, and Count Glamorgan, once in the limelight, buried for a lifetime. But they were all workmanship tools. Why should he choose the utopia instead of the place where you guys fight in every corner every day? What made Huaishur even more puzzled was, what did the Yingzhou genealogy want? They didn't hesitate to take out a bargaining chip, like general. But would he take it if they took it out? Huaishur had already experienced the stupidity of the Looming Hall, but at the same time, he also understood that behind this stupidity was shrewdness. As long as they could protect their own interests, that group of guys could do anything, and they didn't mind being a fool once or twice. So, they felt that he would be swayed. No, anyone who had some understanding of why poetry would not take it for granted to use power to bewitch him, would they? Moreover, people with discerning eyes could now see that Huaishur was Russell's confirmed successor. If the celestial genealogy was re-established, then he would inevitably be the future master of the genealogy. Would he be interested in the position of a general without any real power? Or was this another test, and the position of general was just a smokescreen they threw out? So annoying, this group of guys. Huaishur yawned and was too lazy to think about it. Go home and sleep. 3 hours later, late at night, the capital, Looming Hall, the huge manor located outside the city, was the power organ that controlled the entire Yingzhou sublimators. In the solemn atmosphere that shrouded all year round, the door opened, and the returning messenger hurriedly went upstairs. After throwing his coat to the attendant, he walked into the deep, elegant room. Is Miyoshi back? The one who presided over the meeting was Nanan Zhongchang, who had just taken up the position of the head of the capital. The old man sitting at the top looked up. How is it? Did the king of Danbo reply? The messenger shook his head and reported in detail. In the short silence, Nato, who was smoking a pipe, slowly shook his head. Is he not tempted at all? Although he is young, he is too steady and conservative in his actions, which is completely different from the style he has always shown. It's really confusing. Is this also acting? Someone asked. It doesn't matter whether it's acting or nature. People are always fickle. It's enough to produce an effect, Nanan Zhongchang said. If possible, the emperor still doesn't want to be on bad terms with Danbua. If Huaishir can succeed the position of general, it may be a good thing. An outsider? Wasn't the previous general also an outsider? Nanan asked indifferently. If it's an outsider, it may not be worse. It's just that he may not like it. Why do you belittle yourself, Nanan? Another old man who attended the meeting frowned. After all, this is Ingzhou. Nanan didn't answer. After pondering for a moment, he suddenly said, "Deal with that matter cleanly. Don't let anyone catch the tail end." Please rest assured, Sir Nanan, that transformed whale was definitely born naturally. It rushed over from the Dragon Triangle in front of the Emperor. No matter how much we check, it's at most an accident. The messenger paused slightly and smiled bitterly, but what we found out is really shocking. The atmosphere in the room suddenly stagnated. Everyone's expression turned serious. Even though it was just a projection, they could still feel the chill that made their hair stand on end. The power of that bolt of lightning. For someone like Huaishir, it was not an exaggeration to say that she could casually kill a Huajing that had a corporeal body with a single blow. But it was only that kind of span and distance that made everyone present feel a sense of uneasiness that seeped into their bones. Under the observation lens, the entire process didn't escape their eyes. It didn't take long for a detailed report to be delivered to them. What it brought was a shocking inference. In reality, after piercing through that layer of frightening shell, its principle was actually very simple. It was just using the flock of crows as a transit point along the way. Every 10 kilometers or so, it formed a substation one after another, continuously transmitting this power like an electric current until it finally reached the end of the chain. The flock of crows that Huaishir personally raised would not have any burden when transmitting Huaishir's origin form, and the change in divinity would reduce the rate of consumption to an astonishing level. In the end, when the origin form transformed spear of compassion was unleashed again, this tyrannical power descended from the sky on the surface of the sea thousands of kilometers away from the pill wave. It was as simple as sending a compressed packet through a P2P transmission channel. But apart from Huaishir, no one else could achieve such a simple operation. Apart from him, no one else had such an equipment that could change between origin form and material at any time. Using a flock of crows as an extension of destiny and miracle was undoubtedly great Si Ming's domain. And where this destiny shrouded, the power of wind, rain, thunder, and thunder was the authority that belonged to Yun Zhongjuan. Even though he had not yet reached level 4, Huaishir, who had already undergone a qualitative change in divinity, had begun to gradually explore and master the power of great Si Ming and Yun Zhongjuan, and he was trying to combine them together. As long as the flock of crows was there, Huaishir could use the positioning and transit of the flock to strike a thunderous blow at any time. When great Si Ming's range of interference and Yun Zhongjuan's terrifying execution efficiency were combined together, the result was a monster that could strike at any time across a super-wide area. The attack just now was just a small demonstration of his skill. According to Envoy Sanhao's description and witness, Huaishir did not seem to be straining at all from the beginning to the end. He only pushed open the window as he spoke, then casually tossed out his weapon as if he was throwing a cigarette but downstairs. Thus, a destructive iron light fell from 1,000 miles away. The mighty crow tide was an extension of his limbs, and the land covered by his iron wings was within his reach. Under the observation mirror, they even saw every change in the entire process in detail. After the qualitative change in divinity, the spear of compassion turned into a surging light and soared in the night sky. It moved forward in a straight line, constantly jumping between the nodes formed by the crows. Finally, after crossing a jaw-dropping distance, it poured its fury onto the sea without any loss. A fatal blow. And what was more terrifying was that no one knew if this was his limit. If this power was used to protect the present, it was indeed reassuring. But what if he had other ideas? Even if he just sat there and did not move, as long as Huaishir was willing, even the Kokyo would be shrouded in his shadow. Just thinking about it, everyone present couldn't help but feel suffocated. They felt the invisible blade hanging high above their heads. This is really unsettling. Nan lowered his gaze and looked down at the cooling tea in his cup. He sighed softly and silently. This potential, in the future, he might be even more terrifying than Ghost Fong. No one spoke. Chapter 9, 85. It was also late at night. In the quiet room, an old man with a white beard stared out the window at Donbua's night sky with a pitiful expression. When he saw the lights and the noisy construction site all night long, he couldn't help but sigh silently. The people's lives were so difficult. Who knew how many people had shed blood, sweat, and tears behind this bustling scene? Such a cruel rule, squeezing the people's sweat in exchange for prosperity, was really disgusting. But when a crisp sound came from the door behind him, the pitiful look instantly disappeared without a trace. He became impatient and went up to greet. "How is it? Is there news from there?" "The money has been received." The person who knocked on the door said, "We will provide support when necessary. Please go all out." "Good, very good." The old man looked down at the number on his phone, and his smile became gratified. "Very good. With such support, the end of this evil city is coming." He was obviously so old, but his expression was solemn and firm, as if he was an unyielding warrior. "We, the Wanderer Alliance of Freedom, will definitely not leave it alone." He promised, "Please tell them. Donbua will definitely be able to sweep away the haze and usher in a bright future. Even if the night is dark, the light of freedom will shine on this city." A few days later, in the old city of Donbua, the main body of Donbua in the past had now been replaced by brand new streets. The last thing left was this abandoned building that hadn't had time to be demolished. Now, this place had long been abandoned by time, and there were few people. Only stray cats and dogs roamed about, looking at the construction site in the distance that rumbled through the night. In a deserted old house, under the bright light, an old man stood on the podium and gave an impassioned speech to the audience, full of hostility below the podium. "Friends, when you work hard all day long, spilling blood and sweat, the money you earn is just barely enough to survive. The real fruit is wantonly squandered by the bloodless and tearless upper class to support their extravagant life of debauchery. Relying on the monopoly of potions, Donbua Corporation is turning us into their slaves. Through the Yakuza's high-handed rule, the white paper man forced us to work for them, forced us to consume our lives to satisfy his insatiable greed. Relying on our blood and sweat, he built a magnificent palace, kept countless mistresses, and repeatedly extended his evil hands to innocent children. My daughter is..." At this point, the old man was choked with sobs and tears welled up in his eyes. The audience below the stage was filled with righteous indignation, and their eyes were filled with anger. "Everyone, let's join the Wanderer Alliance and overthrow Huaiji's tyrannical rule." The old man raised his hands and shouted at the audience, "Reject the dictatorship. I refuse to be oppressed." Under the lead of the old man, everyone shouted enthusiastically, "We want an 8-hour workday and normal holidays and benefits. We want to control our homeland. Open up the formula and supply of potions. Give me back my human rights. We want freedom." Freedom! The fanatical shouts continued throughout the night. The drug addicts and the idlers who were attracted were immersed in the vision of freedom and hope in the future. On the roof, the huge black bird that looked like a falcon tilted its head and finished combing the messy feathers on its wings. Then it rose into the air again. Only the faint sound of its chirping echoed in the air. Idiots! Hey, did you guys notice that there are more and more idiots recently? During the weekend dinner, Weno chewed on edamame and complained impatiently, "A bunch of useless people come to the construction site every day to cause trouble. The streets are getting more and more chaotic recently." Once he said that, almost everyone started to complain. Only Oka sipped his wine and looked at them from the side. Anyway, he had retired long ago. No matter how troublesome things were, they could not affect his mentality. On the contrary, he was a little worried about other things. Hey, could it be that some kid from the past didn't know the rules and messed around? Oka cautiously reminded, "Don't cause any trouble. Boss has repeatedly said that you are not allowed to return to your old profession." "Bah, return to my ass." Weno was getting more and more annoyed. He almost crushed his beer glass. "It's not like you don't know the current situation in Danbois. Every one of them has a job, a child, or a lover. There are so many jobs that they can't finish. They are in a hurry to earn money. Every day they have to be chased away before they can go home to sleep. How can they have the time to run around and cause trouble? They are all a bunch of foreign bastards from the border and a bunch of useless trash from the past. Most of them rely on welfare to get by, or just slack off to make a living. Once they drink, they fight and cause trouble everywhere. 2 days ago, there were a few robbers who even killed people. The situation is not small." "Hey, Oka, why aren't you saying anything? Is everything calm on your side?" Among the people here, the only one who did not go to clean up was probably Oka, who was still working under Forest Hut. Today, he was the latest to arrive. There was cement dust on the sleeves and trousers of his suit. It was impossible that he was volunteering at the construction site. His cold and gloomy appearance had not changed. When he heard Weno's question, he only said indifferently, "There are not many people who dare to come here and cause trouble, but there are more and more drug dealers. There are also people who resell medicine. I heard that there are people causing trouble in the pharmaceutical factory." "Yes, I heard that someone wanted to cause trouble, but before he could enter, his leg was broken and he was dragged out. Sai, don't talk about work, don't talk about work." Oka was annoyed. He waved his hand to interrupt their conversation and raised his glass. "Drink, drink, drink. I'm a poor retired old man, but I still have to be poured swill by you guys." For a moment, his nonchalant attitude infuriated everyone. "Hey, who are you looking down on? Give me a bigger glass. Is this the attitude you should have when you're inviting people to drink? Boss, give me 2 more glasses." Unfortunately, the rare gathering was not able to last through the night as usual. Halfway through the meal, Oka received a call and left in a hurry. Some of the remaining people suggested that they change places and continue drinking. Oka was the only one who shook his head. He used his age as an excuse and did not intend to get involved. But when he left, he slowed down and quietly called his old friend. "Hey, Weno, are you well off recently?" Weno touched his head and was stunned for a long time. He quickly reacted. "You're not going to borrow money again, are you? I've been watched closely recently. Lend me some." Oka pleaded helplessly. "I'll return it to you next time." "Oh, right. Don't tell my wife." "You bastard. You said the same thing last time." Although he was helpless and unwilling, Weno still took out his wallet. Before he could take out his money, Oka directly snatched it and stuffed the money inside into his pocket. "You're using your card anyway. Why do you need change?" I'll help you settle it. The old man happily waved goodbye, but after taking 2 steps, he heard Weno's helpless voice. Hey, Oka, don't go to those places. Okay. Oka waved his hand without looking back. He did not know if he heard him. Weno stood there and watched him leave. After a long time, he helplessly scratched his head and turned to walk to the parking lot. But when he opened his car door, he suddenly heard a roar coming from afar. The ground suddenly shook, then thick smoke, fire, and cries slowly rose and lit up the night sky. He was stunned for a moment and ran toward the fire. Passing through the alley, he saw the car basket on the street that was blackened in the fire, and the shops on both sides were devastated. Hey, what's going on? He grabbed a stunned passerby and roared, What the hell? I don't know either. The frightened bastard was almost paralyzed on the ground. He pointed at the burning car. I was walking, and the car suddenly exploded. I really don't know. I don't know anything. The cries woke Weno up from his daze. He looked back at the messy street and rushed up. He recognized the faces one by one and shouted Oka's name loudly. But no one responded. Only the cries of children could be heard from the thick smoke, just below the white-haired man's body. By the time Huaishir received the news and arrived at the hospital, it was already an hour later. In the corridor, the irritated men gathered together heard the approaching footsteps. When they turned around and saw the cold face, they couldn't help but straighten their bodies and bow. The greetings were endless. Huaishir looked down and glanced at the cigarettes in their hands. Put out all the cigarettes. This is the hospital. Don't embarrass yourself in the corridor. Yes. Weno nodded frantically. Without waiting for the others to speak, he grabbed all the cigarettes in their hands, one by one, and crushed them. He threw them out of the window and turned around to smile at Huaishir. Huaishir shook his head and looked at Oka's wife and daughter. The woman bowed respectfully. Mr. Huaishir. No need to be so polite, Mrs. Oka. Huaishir shook his head. Where is he? The woman shook her head and looked at the ward behind her. He just came out. He hasn't woken up yet. What did the doctors say? They still need to observe him. But he's lucky. He's still alive. The woman turned around and glanced at her husband, who was sleeping in the ward. Her eyes were a little red. If he was sent a little later, I'm afraid. It's good that he's fine. Huaishir sighed and glanced at Oka's sorry state. After confirming that he was fine, his slightly gloomy expression gradually calmed down. In the end, he could only sigh helplessly. I've told you many times. You're so old. Don't hit small steel balls. No one responded. The old man's cheeky smile and begging for mercy seemed to be right in front of him. Huaishir opened his mouth and wanted to say something. After a long time, he didn't say anything. He turned around and left. When he stood at the entrance of the hospital, he saw the American homeless man squatting next to the fire hydrant. It's not us. Lawrence raised his hands innocently. Yu Dongri is in charge of the current situation. Without his permission, no one dares to mess around. Then who is it? Huaishir asked. Lawrence's expression became helpless. We can't be the scapegoat every time something happens, right? What else can we do? Huaishir tapped the cigarette box coldly, and the lighter spun between her fingers. 3 people died, 8 were injured, and an entire street was destroyed because of this. A child lost his mother, and my subordinate is still lying in the hospital being rescued. Then you came to tell me that it wasn't us. Lawrence, if it's not you, it must be someone else. If you don't know, I can call you Dongri and ask. Anyway, I want a name. He raised his eyes and looked at the man in front of him. He told him seriously, a name. Being stared at by those dark eyes, Lawrence actually began to feel a chill on the back of his neck. After being stunned for a moment, he sighed helplessly. "Give me some time. 3 hours. Half an hour." Weisher said, "You can move faster. I'll wait for you." Before he finished speaking, Lawrence disappeared from where he stood. 20 minutes later, the homeless man returned. A guy who was already badly mutilated threw a person in front of him. As if he couldn't feel the pain of his broken limbs, the guy was still smiling foolishly. His eyes were blurred, and he was immersed in some dream. "What is this?" Weisher flipped the person on the ground over with his foot. He asked knowingly, "A local product of Canaan?" Lawrence sighed. "This is the guy who put the bomb in the car. A lunatic who went crazy from taking drugs. He didn't run far at all. He was still injecting himself. His brain was damaged. I couldn't get anything out of him. So," Weisher glanced at his watch, "you still have 9 minutes. You can keep me in suspense for a while. I have the patience." Lawrence rolled his eyes and raised his hands in surrender. He didn't delay any longer. Psychic. Chapter 9, 86. The Psychic Society. Weisher should have been enlightened, or perhaps it was like thunder in his ears, but unfortunately, he had never heard of it at all. There were too many illegal organizations in the realm, so many that the rancher alone took up hundreds of pages of the catalog. Moreover, each illegal organization had at least several aliases and different names, and there were even serious cases of overlapping names between each other. As a result, Weisher had never heard of the other organizations except for the first few and the ones with the most obvious characteristics. But in fact, most of the illegal organizations and orders were almost all useless, including the one who had come to Donbwa to cause trouble now. It was just a phone call, and 10 minutes later, all the information on the Psychic Society was sent to Weisher's mailbox. An underground organization that roamed between the borders basically had no characteristics other than pretending to be mysterious, extracting the property of ignorant believers, and engaging in the smuggling of relics and illegal excavation of hell. They had done a little of everything that the Astronomy Society didn't allow them to do, but they weren't good at any of them. They had done almost everything without a bottom line, but none of them were outstanding. The internal organization claimed to worship the truth of the soul. From this point of view, they might be believers of the Pied Piper, but in fact, they couldn't reach the edge of the element of destruction at all. At best, they were at the level of the periphery of the periphery of the periphery. There were probably hundreds of members, but he didn't know the leader, and there wasn't much other information. It wasn't because they were mysterious, but because the leaders changed too frequently and too quickly, and this lousy organization had no influence at all, so it wasn't worth paying attention to at all. Now, such a bunch of useless people had actually come to downtown Donbwa. After Weisher finished reading the information, he was so angry that he almost laughed. What on earth had he done to make them look down on him so much? Find out. Weisher waved her hand and tossed the information to the hut in the forest. Where did they come from? How did they get in? Who did they find? Where are they staying? How many people are there? And how many people are involved? Where is the headquarters? How many branches there are? And how many members are involved? Find out everything. Understood. Little Hut in the woods nodded crisply, put away the information, and turned to leave. It was just that before he left, he turned around to say something, but when he saw Weisher lost in thought, he froze for a moment, slowed down his movements, and gently closed the door for him. Soon, Weisher returned to reality from his contemplation. He looked up at the city outside the window. Danbo gradually became noisy. He knew what the hut in the woods was trying to say. Even if there were 10 spiritual natures together, would they be a match for Huaisher, let alone one spiritual natures? They were nothing more than pawns. The real mastermind was still hiding behind the scenes, hiding in a place that couldn't see the light of day. We can't slack off because of this. But this was the most laughable thing. When you choose to stand upright under the sun, you will become a target for those in the dark. As long as you weren't paying attention, any Tom, Dick, or Harry could step on you. Something must have gone wrong. There shouldn't be such a logic in this world. Huaisher looked out of the window expressionlessly at the places where the lights couldn't illuminate. After a long time, he retracted his gaze. At the same time, in contrast to the peaceful Donbo group, angry roars could be heard from the old houses in the old town. A teacup was smashed to the ground. "Are you crazy, Jean Tian?" the old man angrily asked the smoking man. "What are you doing? You caused an explosion without my permission? Why are you panicking? I'm just spreading a little chaos. Isn't this just pouring oil on your fire?" The head priest of the spiritual natures calmly flicked the ash from his cigarette. "If it weren't for me, that informant would probably be standing in front of the paper effigy right now. You wouldn't be here throwing a tantrum at me. Can't you handle the informant a little more discreetly? Why did you have to blow things up? Apart from attracting the attention of the authorities, what else can you do?" The old man was furious. He coldly looked at his companion in front of him. "The higher-ups sent you to assist me, not to cause trouble for me. Mr. William, the origin substance you provide every day isn't enough to sustain the sacred artifact. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to go out and find resources ourselves." Jean Tian's smile disappeared. "Although we've cooperated with the Wanderer Alliance for so long, we can't delay the internal affairs of the spiritual natures because of you. Otherwise, why would I play with fire under the other party's nose? Since you've already taken so much money, you shouldn't care about anything else, right?" He meaningfully warned, "It's enough for us to do our own things well." The corners of William's eyes twitched. For the first time, he felt that things were gradually getting out of his control. Perhaps he shouldn't have taken that money in the first place. This thought emerged in his mind, but it quickly dissipated due to the huge amount of money. "I hope so. I hope there won't be any more complications." After saying this coldly, he flicked his sleeves and left. It wasn't until he walked out of the door that he regained his usual calm and composed appearance. But for some reason, when he raised his head to look at the towering Donbo building in the distance, he felt as if a pair of cold eyes were looking down on him. He felt faintly uneasy. Not long after, this hidden worry in his heart was replaced by an even greater greed. This city, which was like a gold mine, would soon open its doors to them. Welcome freedom. A few days passed in the blink of an eye. Donbo didn't stop because of a small attack. On the contrary, it didn't stop development at all. After the completion of the street repair work, the construction continued in full swing, little by little, to accommodate the continuous influx of foreign people from all over the border. The production of the pharmaceutical factory also didn't have any interruptions, distributing the medicine to all parts of Asia. In other places, there were more pharmaceutical factories operating day and night, until the hope of the future was delivered to everyone's hands. In the formerly empty port, huge ships came and went every day, and heavy ores were sent to the mountains along the railway. Pillars of thick smoke rose day and night to meet the needs of smelting. The surging thick smoke turned into thick clouds. Under the blowing of the sea breeze, they surged toward the depths of the mountains. Soon, they slowly shrank under the pressure changes created by the scholar's law. After the exhaust gas, which had been heavily filtered, combined with the dust core, it quickly absorbed the water vapor in the sea breeze, turning into heavy mist and light rain. Under the illumination of the rainbow light in the mist, the sand-like metal particles were mixed in the mist shining brightly. In the core of the mountains, there was an entire mountain peak stained with the color of steel. Scholars wearing respirators strolled in the mountains, holding detection instruments in their hands, repeatedly confirming the readings on them and sighing in amazement. It can actually reverse the absorption of harmful particles in the exhaust gas through the metal composition. The technical thinking of the foundry is indeed different from the present. It's just that, using waste to restrain pollution, I really don't know what to say. This little metal composition is not even 1/1000th of the smelting results, and it's still in the recyclable range. With a little effort, it can reduce the pollution by 40%. What else do you want? Get to work quickly. The supervisor in the monitoring center rolled his eyes. That's why you interns are so ignorant. The wastewater treatment area needs to be tested again later. Hurry up, or you'll have to work overtime at night. Is there overtime pay? Are you kidding? Do you think this is the military bureau? Laughter came from the channel. This is celestial genealogy, my friend. Everyone works for their dreams, and it's common to die from overwork. You still want money? F***CK. I should have gone to the Continuation Institute. It's true that the Continuation Institute never works overtime, but they don't get off work, okay? Stop bullshitting and get to work. Get to work. For Danbois, it was still an ordinary day, and in the buildings, in the mountains, there was a new visitor. Oda Motors, Hakushu Corporation, Urashima Machinery Manufacturing, Anjo Electric, Kawakami Heavy Industries, Octagon Group, Edo Electrochemical Industry Group. Most of the representatives of the Ingzhou Manufacturing Group gathered in the conference room of Danbois Industries. The cooperation meeting held by the Ministry of Economy and Industry was held as scheduled. Even the lazy Huaisher couldn't be absent from such a large-scale cooperation meeting. He could only sit among a group of middle-aged and elderly people who were several times older than him. To show his seriousness, of course, the specific cooperation certainly couldn't be finalized during the short meeting. It would take a long time for all parties to communicate and try. Here, at most, everyone was just meeting each other and expressing their intentions. But shortly after the meeting began, the visitors seemed to have discussed it in advance. After understanding the specific details, they straightforwardly put forward a large number of orders. Such a direct attitude was completely different from the implicit tradition of the Ingzhou people. The strong intention and enthusiasm for cooperation surprised Huaisher. However, the way they advanced and retreated together made him surprised, and at the same time, he faintly smelled something unexpected. The reaction of Freeman, the scholar who really presided over the operation of Danbois, also confirmed his guess. As Isaac's deputy for many years, Freeman had always been the actual operator of the assets of the various departments in the ivory tower. He had always been accurate in his position and had never overstepped his authority. But for such a major decision, he didn't even look at Huaisher's opinion and rejected it. Thank you for your enthusiasm, but in the short term, Danbois Smelting doesn't have the productivity to accept this batch of orders. Freeman said, if you can consider batches, we can discuss in detail later. As if they had expected this, the leaders looked at each other and made a new proposal. We can assist in production and buy patents and rights from you. If it works, this number of orders is not a concern, right? Freeman still shook his head. Sorry, we don't have the consideration and need to expand production for the time being. The market is ever-changing, and this opportunity is hard to come by. Please reconsider. We'll consider it. Freeman smiled and calmly resolved this matter. Then he moved on to the next topic. What followed was a long period of garbage time. The two sides wasted their saliva on some trivial matters, but there was no possibility of reaching a consensus and cooperation. It was as if they were just politely coming over and had little interest in other aspects of cooperation. During the lunch meeting, he finally had a short meeting with Weisher. "I'm afraid the situation this time is not good, Mr. Weisher," he said straightforwardly. "I'm afraid they want more than just supply." Chapter 987. Before this, Weisher had already consulted and understood the relevant matters. Now, of course, he did not feel that this was a good thing. What was involved now was the essential contradiction between supply and demand. In the ever-changing market, the position of both the supply and demand side would often change according to the situation and changes in the situation. Both sides were destined to have constant friction and competition over the right to speak. In short, who was the boss? Equality and win-win was just a fairy tale to trick children. In real business, losing the right to speak was tantamount to being trampled on. Whether the other party brought a win-win or plunder, there would be no chance to resist. Now, most of Dombwa Smelting's production was in the smelting base in Anfang district, and it could not handle such a large supply demand. All the participating groups had joined together, using this huge order as a bargaining chip to request to enter the game. On the bright side, they could expand their operations and earn money together. But what if they had other intentions? This would inevitably cause Weisher's control over Dombwa Smelting to weaken, and at the same time, Dombwa might gradually lose its bargaining power in the market. Although that kind of future was farther away than catching a cold or getting lung cancer, it was still necessary to be cautious. This was a consideration between short-term and long-term development. Both options had their pros and cons. But Freeman was suspicious. This was just the beginning. The other party might have other plans. Otherwise, why did he give so much money to the strategy department every year? Then I'll reject it. Weisher played with the lighter in his hand and replied calmly, "Don't feel pity, Mr. Freeman. Not everyone can eat meat from Dombwa's pot." Although it wasn't strange for him to make such a decision, based on Freeman's understanding of Weisher, if he were to give up on such a large fortune and profit, he would definitely feel the pinch for a long time. He didn't expect him to make such an easy decision. For a moment, it was inevitable that he was stunned. "What's wrong?" Weisher asked. "It may be offensive to say this, but I really thought you would hesitate for a long time." "Ha ha ha, Mr. Freeman, you're right. If it was something else, I would definitely feel the pinch for such a large sum of money. To be honest, whenever I miss out on Metatron's discount season or Hell's $0 purchase in the Collection of Sins, I'll be heartbroken for a long time." Weisher smiled. But this is different from those things. That smile was incomparably calm, without any reluctance, causing Freeman to be slightly stunned. "Although everyone thinks that all of this came from me, I've never treated this place as my private property, and I don't feel at ease. Because without other people, I wouldn't have been able to do anything," he said. "There are more things that make me who I am, The ancestors of the Utopia, the unreserved support from the Ivory Tower, the protection from the Book of Destiny, and the guidance from Tongi, as well as the support and trust from all the beast men." Weisher knew that he wasn't the only one who had made all of this. On the contrary, there were too many people to thank. Now that there were results, how could he feel that all of this was achieved through his own efforts? "You have to think of more people, Mr. Freeman." Weisher said, "They deserve better. Are you sure you won't consider it?" Freeman seriously fulfilled his duties as a consultant and explained all the pros and cons to Weisher. After all, it's such a large sum of money. With this money in the account, Dombwa's financial situation will definitely improve a lot, and the current infrastructure will not be stretched too thin. Moreover, the Ivory Tower isn't necessarily afraid of them. It's just a business struggle. We don't lack experience and success. If necessary, we can definitely sweep them out of the game. If we refuse, the local manufacturing industry in Yingzhou may join forces to boycott us. There's no need to think about it anymore. It's just a temporary embarrassment. If there's any greatest strength I have, it must be that I'm especially good at enduring hardship, right? Since we're destined to have a glorious future, why should we gamble now? Huaishur shook his head and flatly refused. The future is with me, Mr. Freeman. Let them go. The future is with me? Freeman pushed his glasses and laughed. This sentence is worth a drink. Then why don't you come to my house for a meal next time? Huaishur suggested. Recently, Mount Tiango sent me a batch of new wine. The taste is very good. Is there whiskey? Only a few bottles of ordinary goods. Huaishur quickly had an idea. But that's easy. I'll go back and get a few bottles of Russell's collection as compensation for everyone's overtime pay. This Freeman was stunned. What? Are you afraid that he'll make things difficult for you? No, please take a few more bottles. The principal owes too much overtime pay. The two of them looked at each other and laughed. It was decided. Huaishur did not participate in the afternoon meeting. It was meaningless anyway. It was better to return to Donbua Group and continue to slack off. However, in the evening, there was an unexpected visitor. It was from the looming hall in the capital, Nan Zhongchang, who was in charge of all the ascendants in the capital. Under the dim light of the setting sun, an old man in an Yingzhou robe sat opposite Huaishur with a warm smile. Mr. Huaishur, how have you been? Huaishur's pen paused for a moment, and the idea of the design of Tianke was interrupted. He raised his eyes and looked over. He simply put the pen aside and asked straightforwardly, "Why are you here, Mr. Nan?" He did not have the habit of playing tricks with the old foxes of the looming hall. It was best to be straightforward. It was the stupidest to play tricks with this old bastard who grew up in dirty water. Moreover, he did not intend to give any promises and guarantees without the discussion of the consultant. I think you should know. Nan smiled calmly. You seem to be dissatisfied with the way of cooperation, but please don't misunderstand. We just want to establish common interests with Donbua. In this way, he did not care to admit that the discussion in the morning was his doing. But other than the looming hall where the ministers gathered, who else had such great influence to mobilize those giant enterprises located in various parts of Yingzhou to unite? Huaishur had already expected this. To be honest, on the issue of how to treat Donbua, we have also had many internal disagreements. But no matter what, we are not willing to let the conflict be aroused and cause displeasure between the two sides. Nan said honestly, in comparison, a situation where both sides benefit is the best. We hope to deepen our relationship with Donbua, and we also hope to have greater interests with you. You don't have to think of us as so dirty. Besides, with the increasing volume of celestial genealogy today, we are not willing to be enemies with it easily. Why can't we become friends? Mr. Huaishur, he said, I can guarantee that this will be a win-win situation. The two sides were honest with each other. Donbua won the order, and the manufacturers got the supply, jointly operating and maintaining, forming a deeper cooperative relationship, and winning the foundation for further cooperation in the future. If things could develop as Nan said, it would indeed be a win-win situation. Huaishur's expression was still cold, and he just asked, I have no other choice except for a win-win situation, right? We came with the idea of cooperation. Nan reiterated, if you are willing to accept our goodwill, time will prove everything. In fact, we don't need anything to prove anything. Huaishur shook his head. Since it's a cooperation, there should be a basis for cooperation and a margin for non-cooperation. Waving the flag of goodwill, regardless of other people's consent, and forcibly inserting into other people's territory to win the so-called friendship and trust. Mr. Nan Nan, this is not the principle of cooperation. Huaisha looked at the old man in front of him and asked doubtfully, "Did you confuse Danbua and Yoshihara? We don't have kabuki here." He didn't mind cooperation. In fact, as long as it involved Danbua's livelihood and future, he didn't mind making more compromises in some insignificant places. But now Looming Hall was seeking the so-called cooperation with such a posture. They even reached out and wanted to interfere with Danbua's lifeline. They even wanted to eat large pieces of meat. Why? You're so sure of me. It seems that you still have some misunderstandings about us, but it doesn't matter. Nan Nan stood up regretfully, but he was not angry. He still replied with a smile, "Looming Hall's goodwill will be reserved for you. No matter when you need cooperation, we will respond. I hope that you can change your mind at the meeting next week." "I'll think about it." Huaisha nodded, pressed the phone, and asked his secretary, Yuan, to send the guest out. Would he think about it? It would be strange if he would think about it. Not only that, Huaisha even suspected that Danbua's abnormality these days might be caused by Looming Hall. Anyway, there had to be a target to blame. Why not choose one he hated? Moreover, if the other party really had any ulterior motives, they would definitely take further action. There was no need to worry about not being able to catch the horse's foot. After leaving Nan Nan, Huaisha didn't do much work. Instead, he took out his mobile phone and began to play games. Then he waited until 7 o'clock and got off work on time. It was impossible to work overtime. It was so happy to be lazy. However, when he walked to the hall on the first floor, he heard a faint noise outside. Outside the door, there were more than a dozen people holding up signs and shouting something inside. "Freedom! We want freedom. We refuse to be oppressed. We refuse to work in sweatshops. Everyone's Danbua will be built by everyone." The slogans were shouted more and more exaggeratedly, which made Huaisha almost think that he had done something that angered the heavens and the people. Not far away, the security guards stopped a few people from entering. After seeing Huaisha walk out, they shouted Huaisha's name and raised the information in their hands to come over. "What do you do?" Huaisha turned around in confusion and looked at Yuan. "Are they here to collect TV fees? We don't seem to have installed cable TV, right?" "No, they're from the Wanderers Alliance of Freedom," Yuan replied. "They've come here several times these days, saying that they want to see you, teacher. It's all about some unimportant things." Huaisha frowned. He had some impression of that so-called alliance. It seemed to be an organization of unique beast men who wandered between the various borders, claiming that their purpose was to liberate all hybrids and seek a free future. But in fact, they were all bark and no bite. They only shouted fiercely. If they had some achievements, they wouldn't have to wait until Huaisha came to Danbua. Their bottom wasn't very clean either. They didn't have the courage to fight for power outside. Instead, there were many bad stories of them squeezing their compatriots from the inside. Since Danbua was established, there was basically no market for this kind of organization. However, Huaisha didn't expect that they would come to Danbua again. "What do they do?" Huaisha asked. It was rare that the girl, who had always paid attention to dignity and bearing, showed a look of disdain. They said that they represent the majority of the citizens to fight for the power they deserve. They asked Danbua to form a city council. They want to represent everyone, supervise the production of the medicine, and participate in the operation of Danbua. After hearing this, Huaisha was stunned for a long time and sincerely praised. "It sounds really good. It's like living in a dream." If he had soaked in the bathhouse for less than 2 minutes, he wouldn't have poured so much water into his brain. At the door, the old man William saw Weisher walking over and immediately showed a warm smile. He took the initiative to greet him and stretched out his hand. "Mr. Weisher, That hand was grasped in the air. Right in front of him, Weisher and Yuan brushed past without any pause. It was as if they didn't see him at all. They talked and laughed as they walked forward. From beginning to end, they didn't even glance at him. William stood in place, his smile gradually stiffening. After a long time, it was difficult to hide his ashen face. He flicked his sleeves and left. Chapter 988. Looming Hall. He didn't see anyone at all. NATO, who was smoking a pipe, heard his subordinate's report and raised his eyes in surprise. The subordinate nodded. Yes, it seems that he doesn't care about those things at all. Weisher, that guy, has already inflated to such an extent. After all, he's a young man. He doesn't even bother to put on a show. Very well. If the heavens want him to die, they must make him crazy. He's addicted to the expansion of power and has no eyes for anyone else. It's not far from the time when the people's hearts are lost. NATO knocked on the pipe and pondered for a moment. Suddenly, he said, "Tell William and Kenita that we want to see his further results." He said, "The sooner the better." "Yes." The subordinate nodded and turned to leave. In the darkness, only NATO quietly stared at the flickering flame in the pipe. The faint sparks illuminated the pair of cold eyes. The atmosphere on the street seemed to have changed. It was getting more and more impetuous. No matter how slow the residents were, they now saw more and more contradictions and conflicts on the street. Ghetto in suits, which were rarely seen in the past, appeared in the streets and alleys, and there were more and more people causing trouble. There were also many familiar faces among the unfamiliar faces. There were flyers distributed by the Alliance of Freedom everywhere. It was said that many stores were also smashed. The reason was that they looked down on the foreign mixed race or wage discrimination, and some simply suspected that the doctor had prescribed them fake medicine. There were also more and more fights. There were also places that had started a strike. The elderly closed the door and told their children not to run around. In the middle of the night, they heard abnormal movements. The men who had just returned from the construction site would wake up and press the dusty weapons under the bed. They were worried. Many people had already reported it to the company or the group, but the higher-ups were still calm. They only ordered that everything was as usual and then strengthened the defense. It made people feel a little uncertain. It was said that the production was not very smooth. Several vehicles transporting the medicine had accidents. There were also some supply contracts that had been signed that were reneged on. It was said that the pollution was excessive and violated the Environmental Protection Act. They had to be investigated by the Environmental Association or something. Everyone could feel that the atmosphere of uneasiness was quietly spreading in Danbois. It wasn't until 4 days later that a flame rose up. Outside of Danbois, in the suburbs of Kyoto, 2 trucks collided. The explosives hidden in the cargo were detonated, destroying more than half of the warehouse. 3 people were seriously injured, and 1 was killed. The remaining license plate number was from Danbois. It was Danbois again. "Okay, I got it." Weisher nodded calmly and said to the subordinates who came to inform him, "I'll leave the aftermath to you." "Yes." The subordinate nodded and turned to leave. Only in the office, Weisher looked down at the report on the table expressionlessly. The driver who caused the accident was an employee of YG Construction. He was 41 years old, male, and was responsible for transporting materials and construction waste for the construction site. The car was bought with a loan, and there were still 41 years to repay. He had a daughter and a newborn son. It was old-fashioned and never got into a conflict with others. Even when Dombwa was at its most chaotic, it did not engage in any illegal activities. Then, when he was working overtime last night, he disappeared and mysteriously appeared in Jingdu. There were even traces of forbidden drugs on his body. Spiritual theory again? Huaishur asked. Yes, they should have a border relic that can control consciousness. Huaixi replied. The scope of their activities and their upper echelons have been figured out. The location of the headquarters also has an idea. Too slow. Huaishur interrupted him and told him, You should be faster. It's my fault. The youth lowered his eyes and did not refute. No, it's only because you're doing something that I can blame you. Huaishur shook his head and laughed self-deprecatingly. There's nothing perfect in this world. On the contrary, I'm the one who's indecisive. Huaixi was not wrong. He had already done his best. On the contrary, he was too harsh. How could something that involved hundreds of thousands of people and the undercurrent brewing within the entire city be settled with the press of a button? There would always be loopholes in guarding against thieves for 1,000 days. He could not act rashly and alert the enemy. He had to cast a long line to catch a big fish. He had to find an opportunity to catch them all in one fell swoop and uproot all the hidden dangers. Therefore, he had to endure and wait. But everything had a price. But when he saw living people turn into death notices one by one and appear in front of him, he would sincerely realize his weakness and powerlessness. He could not get used to it, even if he did not have the responsibility for everyone. This is what I asked you to do, little 19. You don't have to feel guilty or uneasy. Huaishur said, If it were me, it might not be so smooth. You just have to do your best. He said, I'll bear all the consequences. This was the only guarantee he could make. Huaixi nodded and turned to leave. After a short silence, Huaishur heard the sound of the internal phone again. It was a notification from Yuan Yuan. The commissioner of the Yingzhou Governing Bureau came to visit. I don't think there's any need to say more. Huaishur stared at the fidgeting commissioner. I remember that my relationship with the Yingzhou branch is not so good that I can send gifts to them every day, so you can say it directly. In a short silence, the commissioner sat on the sofa uneasily, twisted his body, and said stutteringly, Because of the possible terrorist attack, the looming hall submitted a search application to the governing bureau not long ago. Your reaction is quite fast. Huaishur seemed to laugh. Dombwa is a special pilot city recognized by the Astronomical Society, but it's not under their control. Or do you have a different opinion on this? The commissioner's face became more and more nervous. He took out a handkerchief and wiped the sweat on his forehead, not daring to look at his eyes. This matter involves the sovereignty of Yingzhou, so it's inconvenient for the governing bureau to intervene. The voice of the commissioner, who was pushed out to take the blame, was already trembling. I hope that the two sides can resolve it peacefully. In other words, you're on the side of the looming hall? Huaishur nodded in understanding. He looked down at the notice on the table and said indifferently, Let Renee talk to me. Minister Renee has gone to London a few days ago to participate in the overall planning meeting. The commissioner lowered his head. The Yingzhou branch is just acting according to the rules. We don't have the intention to be your enemy. Rules? Whose rules? Huaishur raised his hand and waved the notice. I didn't see the seal of the central decision-making room. Or do you want to use the sword of the Yingzhou Governing Bureau to cut me, a special military officer? I'm just following orders to convey the message. I know, so I won't make things difficult for you. Huaisher said coldly. You just have to go back and tell your colleagues that I don't agree. When Renee comes back from the central decision-making room, I'll have a good talk with him. The commissioner nodded frantically as if he had been pardoned. It was as if he had escaped from under a guillotine. He was about to cry. He immediately got up and wanted to say goodbye. But then he heard Huaisher's voice. He was calm and curious. But before that, can you tell me? Huaisher looked down at the document on the table and asked in confusion, who passed this application? Who signed this notice? The commissioner froze on the spot. At this moment, it was as if he saw the door of hell open behind him. Endless darkness rose violently and swallowed his soul. But that was just an illusion. After a moment of trance, he was already sweating profusely. There was only Huaisher's smile there. It was so gentle. It was as if it covered the entire hell. He ended the conversation in a friendly manner, thoughtfully wrote a reply letter, and politely sent the commissioner downstairs. After congratulating him on a safe journey, he watched the car escape as if it was running for its life. Huaisher sat on the bench in the hall and calmly stared in the direction they left in, as well as the figures holding signs and shouting outside the door. At this point, the situation was completely obvious. The pressure from the looming hall was obvious. Through the relationship with the Ingzhou Governing Bureau, they tested the pressure on Huaisher and squeezed Dambua's living space in all directions. Business, life, and public security from every corner. They told this annoying outsider that if he didn't know how to read the air and didn't know the consequences of not understanding the rules, they didn't even resort to force. Instead, they taught Huaisher a lesson and waited for his reply. Either he chose to compromise and join the warm embrace of the looming hall, or he continued to be isolated and gradually shook Dambua's foundation. Nan Nan's knife had indeed accurately hit Huaisher's sore spot. Indeed, once Dambua's foundation was shaken, Huaisher would fall into a passive position. But the premise was that he had to be shaken. He dialed the number on his phone and waited for the call to be connected. Without waiting for the other party to speak, he asked straightforwardly, "Hello, is the stinky sister there?" Bang! The sound of slapping the table came from the other end. As if he had been angry for a long time, Hooper replied irritably, "If you have something to say, say it. I'm busy." "Are you involved in this matter?" Huaisher asked. Hooper was so angry that he laughed. "Get your facts straight. Who's your biggest partner right now? I'm going to instigate those old ghosts to cooperate with you and harm the interests of Enfang? Am I crazy?" "That's true." Huaisher nodded. "It doesn't seem like there's something wrong with your brain." On the other end of the phone, Hooper closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Calm down. I can't lower myself to the same level as this bastard." "Listen, Huaisher, I know you're very angry, and I know you want to make things difficult for people right now, but you have to understand that my blood pressure is off the charts just by being Dongxia's lackey in Ingzhou. Don't provoke me, okay?" She said, "If you're willing to leave this matter to me, I'll definitely give you a satisfactory answer. But, the Eastern Summer genealogy has never done a losing business. The relationship between Danbua and Taiching Heavy Industry was already too close. If it went any further, it would also have the hidden danger of losing its independence. Don't worry, it's not to the extent that I can't handle it myself." Huaisher said, "You just need to give me a few names." Hooper heard this and laughed again. "You want me to give you a list of the upper echelons of Looming Hall? There's no need for so many. If we're talking about precision attacks, a few of them will be enough. Tell me who the leaders are." Huaisher said, "I don't mind having a few more who aren't on good terms with you." Hooper was silent for a long time and couldn't help but sigh, with a headache. "What?" Huaisher laughed. "You want to say that you don't need it? Of course I won't reject the benefits that come to my door. But what's the price? Why sure? Hoopa said faintly, if you don't take the money, I don't have confidence in my heart. Then forget it. Pretend I didn't say anything. Weisher followed the good advice. If there's nothing else, then I'll hang up. After a short silence, a helpless voice came from the other end. Wait a minute. Thus, Weisher's smile became more and more cheerful. Chapter 989. Did he really say that? In the looming hall, Nato was already dumbfounded. He confirmed it again and again. It was still unbelievable. He actually dares to go against the directorate. Nato exclaimed, that guy, is he going to throw his biggest protection aside? It's ridiculous. Once the matter got out of hand, the relationship with the directorate would be broken, causing him to lose the recognition of the Astronomical Association. Without the protection of the law, the Donbo would be just a piece of meat on the chopping board. That Dongsha person had finally gone crazy. Very good. It couldn't be better. Nato laughed. Soon, he raised his head and ordered again. Now that things have come to this, the conflict between the Donbwa and the Ingzhou Directorate has intensified. There's no need for an existence like the Spirit Union in the future. He said, send out the evil spirits and clean them all up. Do it cleanly and don't leave any clues. After pondering for a moment, he ordered again, send a few people to protect William. Don't let him die. Let him add fuel to the fire. Tell him that after this matter is done, I guarantee the position of the Wanderer Alliance in the Donbwa Parliament. It's not impossible for him to be the speaker. Yes. The subordinate accepted the order and left. As for Nato, he looked at the report in front of him again and couldn't help but laugh out loud. There was no need to do anything else. He just had to wait for the seeds to sprout. What could be more pleasurable than to sit and watch the enemy kill himself? 2 hours later, the old man William raised his head in shock and stared at the messenger in front of him. Is what you said true? Of course. The messenger solemnly conveyed the words from the top, whether it's funds or international support. As long as you can open the situation, there's no problem. Don't worry, leave it to me. After confirming the balance of the account again, William smiled and promised, it's our duty to shed the last drop of blood for our compatriots. The messenger had already left silently. As for William, he walked forward excitedly. The exciting speech was about to begin again. The old houses in the old city district were immersed in a fanatical atmosphere. In the silent night in the distance, only the cries of the iron crows echoed faintly. The surging undercurrent was not limited to the interior of the Donbwa. As the commotion spread over the past few days, it had more or less attracted the attention of outsiders. Long before that, Vice Principal Isaac had called, but he seemed to have more confidence in Weisher than he did in himself, other than reminding him that the school had plenty of human resources and that they could be mobilized at will when necessary. He didn't care about anything else. In the middle of the night, Weisher received an unexpected call. Tengu Mountain. I heard that you've been covered in dirt recently. You're in a very sorry state. The mocking laughter of the Daitengu drifted over. Even those of my generation who are in the border prison mountain have heard of you. Did it spread far and wide? Weisher was slightly stunned. That's a little embarrassing. It's just a disease of the skin. A gentleman can take advantage of it. For someone like you, little brother Weisher, I'm afraid this is the only way. There's no need to be ashamed. Rather than saying that it's shameful, it's better to say that this proves your virtue. After the Daitengu spoke, a strange smile appeared on his face. In any case, if you need any help, feel free to speak. There's no need to worry. It's just a small matter. Huaisher shook his head. It's because it would be a joke if I had to trouble others for something like this. In addition, I don't want to give the Daitengu the chance to owe me a favor. Since this is the case, I won't say anything more. But after all, this is the current situation. Don't act recklessly. The Daitengu rubbed his chin. When he thought of how ruthless this junior was, he couldn't help but click his tongue. Most probably, the people of the looming dojo were also hoping for such a situation to occur, right? What could be more delightful for a schemer than a hero going on a killing spree and injuring civilians? However, from the tone of the Daitengu, Huaisher didn't lose his composure. Not only that, the Daitengu felt slightly more at ease. I heard that there will be a meeting in Ingzhou tomorrow. Are you going there? Naturally. Isn't there someone who wants to see me in a sorry state? I don't want to disappoint them. Ho, seems like there's going to be a good show to watch. The Daitengu nodded in understanding and didn't say anything else. He only reminded Feng, Lin one last time, be careful of a fire in your backyard. What's there to be careful about something that won't happen? Huaisher calmly replied, There's no place for flammable trash in my backyard. After hanging up the call, he inclined his head and glanced at the clock on the wall. The midnight bell rang out. Calculating the time, it was about time to clean up the trash. Won't come again? What do you mean? In the old city district, in the noisy old houses, William's followers once again received bad news. The person who answered the call angrily asked, Could it be that you want to betray everyone? Hey, say something. My wife is about to give birth. I have no choice. Next time, I will definitely. From the other end of the call, the high-pitched voice of a woman rang out. Very soon, the call was hung up. This is too much. He is clearly doing this for everyone, but he actually wants to run away? The person in charge of the organization grumbled in anger, causing a wave of righteous indignation. Don't be too harsh on him. He might have been coerced. William sighed and spoke in a meaningful tone. Everyone is working together for the sake of fighting for the rights and benefits we have won. The closer it is to a time like this, the more we have to be united. How can we be harsh on our compatriots who are also being trampled on? Everyone must remember that only when we truly have the right to speak can we allow our compatriots to stand freely under the sun. Mr. William is right. Tomorrow we will teach the Domba Corporation a lesson. The good days of those sanctimonious fellows are coming to an end. For a moment, under William's encouragement, the originally slightly low morale was restored to enthusiasm and was filled with hope. Only when the old man turned his head, in the shadows where the light could not find, a trace of gloominess appeared on his face. He was suppressing his anger. This was not the first participant to quit midway. As early as a few days ago, many people had already disappeared. Those who were already familiar with them also began to use all kinds of excuses to brush them off. When there was profit to be gained, they were all extremely enthusiastic. But when it came to the real deal, they all wanted to retreat. In the end, it was because these cheese were living too good a life. Unlike the anger he felt in other places in the past, there was no hostility at all. Their edges and corners had long been worn away by this seemingly peaceful life. They were completely a group of people who could not be trained. Fortunately, brave men were bound to appear when there was a large sum of money. There were still more participants who stayed. It didn't matter if they believed in freedom and hoped that he didn't believe in, or if they wanted to make a big profit out of it. This group of scum that even the other mixed breeds looked down on could still be used. People followed the crowd and were always ignorant. Once the fire was lit, it would become bigger and bigger like a rolling snowball. After the water was muddied, which fish could stay out of it? As for whether they succeeded or not, was that still important? Or rather, It would be a joke to expect this group of people who had abandoned themselves and were addicted to forbidden drugs, who would take risks for a little bit of money, or who were simply stupid to the point where they could not see the situation clearly to succeed. They were just a group of cannon fodder. It did not matter if they lived or died, but it was precisely their existence and the turmoil that they caused that was enough to shake the legitimacy of the Dombo Corporation's existence, weaken the halo that existed on Huaishur, and beat the so-called King of Dombo back to his original form. Did a chaotic Dombo Corporation really need to exist? When the time came, it would be the world of the Wanderers' Alliance of Freedom. After repeatedly checking the name list, his originally faintly uneasy heart gradually calmed down. These days, that kind of uneasy premonition had been lingering in his heart. It had been smooth sailing, and there were only some insignificant bumps, but it gradually seemed that something was different. The situation seemed to have begun to change. He had clearly been very familiar with this trick at the various borders, but this time he kept feeling his heart palpitate. It seemed to be calm, but there seemed to be an invisible iron wall erected. It could not be seen or touched, but it was closing little by little. It brought about an illusion of suffocation. It was as if, in response to their performance that had been jumping up and down all this time, that pair of arrogant eyes that were high above finally lowered their heads and glanced at him. It made William's heart tighten. After sending off the participants, William returned to the secret room and summoned his trusted subordinates again. Have you found the people? Don't worry, Mr. William. We are professionals in this. The smoking man patted his chest and promised, we will respond to you tomorrow. When the signal is sent, people everywhere will be mobilized. Let's make this city lively. Very good. I won't say anything unnecessary. Remember your reward after the matter is done. William nodded in satisfaction and then asked his subordinates to push out dozens of heavy boxes from the warehouse. Tomorrow, ask your people to bring this. After the boxes were opened, the yellow light of the bullets illuminated everyone's eyes. The guns and even the bombs that had been polished off emitted the tempting smell of engine oil. This is really a big deal. The smoking man beamed with joy as he stroked the silent steel. He already couldn't wait. The next day, when the sun rose, the entire city seemed to be shrouded in haze. Under the high-pitched sounds of the loudspeakers, the crowd on the streets gathered together, forming a long, winding dragon under William's shouts. The roars of anger and the roars of greed overlapped. In the crowd, William was lifted up and bathed in the sunlight. He held the microphone tightly and shouted to the crowd in front and behind him, "Today, we are united to fight for our own power. Take back our freedom. My compatriots, open your eyes. Take a look at everything that has been tortured. Take a look at the tears of the children and the old mothers. Oppose forced labor." The agitators in the crowd shouted fanatically, "Freedom! We want freedom. Down with Dombo. Down with the Huai paper group." In the parade, the crazy atmosphere had begun to surge. There were constant cracking sounds, and masked people on both sides of the street threw the bottles in their hands at the closed doors. Little flames began to burn. Thick smoke rose. The peaceful city welcomed restlessness and roaring. There were already masked people who excitedly smashed the windows and rushed into the shops, beginning to fight for the things inside. There were more people who couldn't resist the temptation and joined in. William laughed. His smile was illuminated by the flames, and he no longer hid the greed and ferocity in his smile. Very good. That's it. Friends, let's show those tyrannical superiors our backbone. He shouted as he led the procession towards the towering building in the distance. The surging crowd moved forward like a tide, with irresistible force, without any obstruction. Forward. Then it came to an abrupt stop. It was as if a sweeping flood had hit a dam and a high wall and could no longer spread. The restless crowd stopped one after another, causing William to look up in shock. But what blocked the front was not thousands of soldiers and horses, nor were the troops and legions armed to the teeth. On the wide road, it was empty. There was only one chair, placed in the middle of the intersection. The man leaned on the chair, propped up his chin, and looked at the rebels in front of him. In the face of the spreading violence, his expression did not change. He was as calm as ever. It was as if he was looking down at the dust. There was only one person, but he just stared coldly. It made the rioting torrent not dare to move forward, as if everything was frozen. At that moment, William lost his voice. Why sure that you're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.